Then as we do that, I will request the following to come up. From PSF, Faustin, if you can come up to join the table up here. From the African Development Bank, the country manager, Ms. Aisa, and Director, Private Sector, Abdul. Yeah. So as they are doing that, please let us settle down. My name is Walter Odero, the country economist for the African Development Bank, based here in Kigali. Been around in Kigali for about 1.5 years. And I will be taking part as one of your MCs. Joining me as MC from PSF will be Betty. Betty, where are you? Thank you, Betty. So Betty will be the co-MC for today. So I just wanted to take us quickly through the program for the day. But before I do that, I believe our IT colleagues are checking whether we have people connected online. We shared out connection parameters for YouTube and I think other channels. So you will check if we have people connected online, and then you will alert the MCs so that we can speak to them. So the way we have divided the work with Betty, I will do the bit for the opening ceremony, then Betty will guide the technical presentations. So according to the program, we have already completed the first part, which is the installation of the participants. And the second part, which I'm going to guide, will be the welcoming remarks. First by PSF, and then that will be followed by remarks from the African Development Bank. After that, we will go straight into the technical presentations, which will be guided by Betty, which will focus on the African Development Bank country strategy paper for Rwanda, and that will be followed by our continental private sector development strategy for all the 54 countries where we work. And then that will be followed by the products which we have for the private sector. And I think that is the main reason why we are here, so that you get to know what the bank has on the table and which you can tap into. That is the main reason why we are here. Then we will close from 12, the technical presentations. We will have lunch. And then after that, we'll go to the second and most interesting bit for me, which is getting business deals. So we have our colleagues from headquarters. We will introduce them. And each of those colleagues will lead in an industry. We will announce the rooms where they will be, and then we will go there and have business deals with them. That will not be the end of it, because this is just the beginning. So after this, we will then have continuous dialogue with the private sector in Rwanda. And then in the evening, we'll have a more informal chit-chat amongst ourselves between 5 and 6, where we can discuss more informally on what opportunities we have. So without much ado, as I said, we'll introduce our bank colleagues later on, because we have not introduced everyone. We will go straight to the opening ceremony. And just to announce, I think we have some members of the press who will cover the opening ceremony. Thereafter, when we go into technical presentations, I think that will be our private dialogue. We will have a press brief for them. But from 12 at the closing ceremony, they can come back and hear some of the recommendations. So I think in the order in which we are, we will start with Faustin, and then we will move straight to our country manager, Aisa, who is sitting in the middle, and then we will move straight to our director, who is sitting on this end. I think we have just one mic. So, no, there's a mic there. There's a mic there. So, can we go straight? Faustin, please. You know your members.
Good. Good morning. Mwaramutse. Twongeye kubahereza ikaze muri iki gitondo cya none kuba mwitabiriye iyi nama ngirakamaro. Almost 3 months back, we met the African Bank, the ADB. And by the time we met, we came to learn that they have a portfolio for the private sector, specifically here in Rwanda, with a minimum of $100 million per annum. And unfortunately, they're somehow, in dilemma. Why are they not seeing the private sector borrowing, from the bank? And to us, it was really, do you have that money? If you have that money, we also have the players who are ready with the project that are bankable, with a good reputation, that would really be reliable and good partners with the bank. And then the question was, how do we move forward? And the answer of the Private Sector Federation was, what if we meet? You bring your senior managers who can provide more details about the financing and who can also facilitate the decision making. Because to have information is one thing, but for the private sector, what matters is to walk the talk. And to Madame Aissa here, it was no worries. If it is really to bring them, you bring your members, we'll also bring them so that, we can provide that platform for accessing the financing and accessing the affordable financing. So that is why we are all here today. That's why since the 2 weeks we managed to reach to you, and we really very much appreciate to those who fill the form, the questionnaire, and send it back, which provides again more details facilitating the B2Bs. So today we are here not only to hear, but to access the fund from ADB. I was even having the conversation with my brother Abdu here that our members, among things they want to hear, first is how competitive is the interest rate. Second, how do you deal with the exchange rate? Third, how can the process be shortened? Because projects are there, and you have the money, and the market is ready. So we are here for that, and we really wish a very fruitful deliberations. Kindly don't go back without a commitment from Madame Aissa or Mr. Abdu about, when you can access the fund. We are there. We have the Business Advisory Clinic that will also be ready to facilitate, to provide, to act as the liaison officer between you and the bank where needed. So let's really make work the talk and keep boosting our economy through the private sector as it is highlighted in the vision of this country, to have a private sector-led economy. So without further ado, I should hand over to Madame Aissa, who will now, take over and even introduce the ADB professionals who will be facilitating from today on moving forward. We thank you. Tugire ibihe byiza twese muri iki gitondo cya none. Murakoze.
Hello. Thank you. Yes, I think that I will go there. Thank you, Faustin, for giving the background of why we're here and how we, over the past 3 months, we engaged. because I think there was a lot of frustration from both sides. This year only, the bank on our private sector window, as we speak, we have 242 million USD, which might not be used if we don't have lines of credit. Last year it was 150, the year before it was 100. You see the increase. And I think that we are known for public financing, but we do have private sector windows. Unfortunately, in Rwanda, unlike other countries, we are known for that. So really, really thank you to the senior management of the PSF for bringing you and us so that we can have this conversation. And I really hope that this is the first seminar of this kind, because dealing with private sector is not a one-off, right? You have to keep the engagement. We have colleagues coming from Abidjan and Nairobi, but we also are here. We are 18 in Kigali, Rwanda, country program, so that we can engage daily. I remember the first time 2 years ago when I joined the bank here, met with Minister Uziel to introduce myself. He said, I know what you're doing in public sector because infrastructure is our footprint. But for me, it's private sector, private sector, private sector. And I was a bit panicked because I didn't know the bank. But I'm so, so pleased that within 2 years, really, I don't know, I think we had 7 missions since 2021, you know, private sector missions. Our VP came, Abdul came several times, colleagues are in the room, so that it takes time, but here we are. And as Faustin said, we hope that this afternoon we'll have a better understanding of the windows, the product, the cost, etc. And then we'll keep engaging. And because it's private sector, you can engage, you know, with all the colleagues and beyond the one that are here. So it's really my pleasure to welcome you and thank you to all of you for making, you know, responding to this invitation. On behalf of my colleagues from the bank, I really want to thank you. But maybe just to give you an overview of what the bank is doing here. We have a portfolio, as we speak now, of 26 projects, mainly in infrastructures, which account for, which is our footprint. This portfolio is $1.5 billion, with 87% of that amount in infrastructure, water, sanitation, transport, and energy. The remaining, right, is private sector, despite the fact that our strategy that Walter will present very soon has a full-fledged pillar on the private sector and doing business. But unfortunately, for many reasons, here we are, it's only a tiny portion of that, 12% that goes to private sector. And despite the fact that we have big envelope that goes back every year, and this year I don't have any, you know, unless there is something, a miracle this afternoon, but the 242 million USD might not be utilized if we don't have a pipeline of projects. So really, in other countries, there is the balance between public financing and private financing is, you know, quite even. Here is really, really more public, and this is something that we want to change, to see the dynamic changing, because as we all know, Rwanda has opted for a private sector-led growth, as indicated in NST1, and NST2 will not be different, right? I think that is even more so. So I think that we need to strive together, to learn, to work together so that the footprint of private sector in the socio-economic development of Rwanda will be more important. So I just want to once again say merci beaucoup, thank you to all of you, and then we're looking for a very great discussion in this seminar. Merci beaucoup, bye.
Thank you. Good morning. PSF leadership, led here by the Chief Operations Officer, Faustin Karasira. Representatives from the Rwandan government. I know there are a couple of ministries here, Ministry of Finance, Commerce and Industry, Investments, RDB, colleagues from the African Development Bank, those in Kigali, in our local office here, but also those who flew in from Nairobi and Abidjan and other offices, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. So let me join Isa Torre, our country manager, in welcoming you warmly to this interactive event, and to say thank you for coming. We know you have a lot of other things to do, but you coming here just shows us how interested you are in learning about what we do in the bank. I have a short prepared speech, but to be honest, in the spirit of private sector, the way private sector is, I'm going to throw away this speech and just talk from my heart. And the reason why I'm talking from my heart, before I joined the bank 5 years ago, I was working in the private sector. I was a chief strategy officer at the Dangote Group, the largest conglomerate on the continent. I was there for 3 years as a chief strategy officer. I know the pain, I know the issues, I know what private sector deals with every day on the continent. And I think Rwanda is not different. And I know that private sector, without private sector, Africa cannot develop. So at the African Development Bank, whatever we do, if we don't really work with the private sector, our overall objective and this big mission and vision that we have to bring about Africa's economic and social transformation, which is why the bank was set up, will not happen without working with the private sector. So we are here today to tell you that the private sector, the African Development Bank, is open and willing to support private sector development and engagement in Rwanda, as we will do in all our member countries across the continent. Now, Rwanda, you've given what we've seen, in the last 3 decades, you've done really, given the development and all the issues that happened in the last 3 decades, we're very confident that the basic ingredient is here for the private sector to thrive. And what are the basic instruments? What does the private sector need? The right policies, regulations, laws, institutions, so the right framework that will be consistently applied. That's number one. Number two, enabling infrastructure, so power, transportation, and so on and so forth. 3, access to markets. 4, human capital development, so the right skills to develop the private sector. And then 5, access to finance. So today's seminar is actually zeroed in on the last part, which is access to finance. And so through the next couple of hours, we'll take you through the various instruments. In the AFDB, we have lending instruments, we have guarantees, we have equity, we have special funds. We'll talk about those. But we'll also talk about the eligibility criteria for tapping into those funds. What do you need to do? Your competent management system, your environmental and social safeguards and things like that. The bankability of the project. So this is all the things that we're going to talk about. And yes, first we're going to address all your nitty-gritty questions around the rates and around the exchange rate issues and tenor and all of that. And I think our big objective here is to walk away. We want to leave you with 2 key messages. One, the Africa Development Bank does indeed support the private sector. Every year, we spend about $1 to $1.5 billion across the continent to support the private sector. And you've had in Rwanda a minimum of 100 million every year to do that. So that is number one. Number 2, we have the right institutional frameworks. We've just got our board last year to approve a private sector development strategy. I think El Hadji is going to talk about that at some point. This is the framework on how we engage. The African Development Bank is your own bank. Rwanda, remember, you are a member, you're a shareholder of this bank. All the 54 African countries are shareholders, and then we have additional 27 non-African countries as shareholders. So this is your bank. Give us feedback. What do you think? And we're flexible. Some of these things that we're going to talk about, if things don't work with you, because we know, and I know, where I sat before I joined the bank, what the private sector needs. We're flexible, we'll work with you, we'll support you, and so please engage And please work very closely with our country office here that is fully equipped to provide the basic information, but also to link you up with the key sectors in Abidjan and elsewhere. We cover all sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, PSF and the bank. I think maybe you can now resume your seats there. I think the key takeaways from the opening remarks is that the bank is ready to deal with the private sector in Rwanda. And PSF is ready to do the mobilization. I think that for me is the key takeaway. And the other message is the bank has the money. I think for this year, Aisa said, we have 242 million US dollars. You can multiply that by 1,000, and I don't know what the exchange rate is today, so that you know how much is available. And that money is available from January 2023 to December 31st, 2023. That is the key message I wanted to highlight. I think because we have PSF members, you know yourselves, I just wanted to take this opportunity to show you the bank team that is in the room. If the bank team, except the country manager, has been seen, and the director, the rest of us, please, if you can stand up so that PSF members can know who is in the room from the bank. So you can see it's a strong team that has come here to do business. I think maybe we can introduce ourselves. Let's introduce ourselves. We are not so many. Let's introduce ourselves. Just your name, and you are all in the bank.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is El Hajba. I'm Chief Policy Economist in the Office of the Vice President in charge of private sector. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Paul Vivian Chinyolo. I'm the Country Program Officer for the bank here in Kigali. Thank you.
Mecca Ongbufo, Principal Investment Officer. I cover industries and services and ICT. I work with Abdul.
Hi everyone, I'm Diane Lee. I'm Investment Officer in Agribusiness, Private Sector Agribusiness, based in Nairobi.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Charles Orothun. I'm also a Private Sector Investment Officer in the Agriculture and Rural Infrastructure Development Department. I'm based in Abidjan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bernard Muhati, Trade Finance Officer in the Trade Finance Division of the Financial Sector Department of the bank, overseeing projects in Eastern Africa. I sit in Nairobi. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Richard Ofurimanti. I'm the Division Manager for Agric Finance and currently the Acting Director for Agricultural Finance and Rural Development.
Moses, you can introduce yourself as well.
I'm Moses, Communications Specialist, African Development Bank. Murakoze, mafaranga rahari.
So that is the management and technical team, but we have others at the background. Maybe we'll not introduce all ourselves. So I think at this juncture, maybe I also need to know whether Minekofin. Also, no. Later too.
Good morning. I'm Simbi Claudine Moramute. I'm the assistant to the country manager. I'm based in Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you. Murakoze kandi.
Good morning. My name is Hanan Tayfour. I'm a policy and operations consultant, and I work in the office of the Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization, and I'm based in Abidjan.
Good morning, Moramute. My name is Eric Hunzi. I'm the IT officer of the Office of Rwanda.
So I think with more than 10 people from the bank sitting in the room, you can see how serious we are about this business. I want to confirm that we have Minekofin. Is Gerald and Lillian? Not yet. RDB? Do we have RDB already in the room? Well, they confirmed. I believe they are on the way coming. So at this juncture, let me hand over to Betty to guide. Minicom. Okay, please, introduce yourself. I believe RDB and Minnecoffin will be coming so that we show that it's a joint dialogue between the bank, the government, and the private sector. Please.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Godfrey Gachire, the Single Project Implementation Unit Coordinator in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let me hand over to Betty.
Mwaramutseho muraho. Nitwa Betty Abatoni, nkaba ndi umukozi wa PSF, nkaba ari njye ugiye kuyobora iki cyiciro kigiye gukurikira cy'inama. Ngira ngo abayobozi bamaze kudufungurira inama, mwumvishije icyo bavuga bijyanye n'uyu munsi. Impamvu turi hano nuko aho turi hano ariko ni ibyiciro bibiri, hari bank hakaba na private sector ndetse n'abagenzi bacu bamwe bavuye mu public sector, aho hagaragaye ko hari dilemma cyangwa abantu kutumva ibintu kimwe, aho bank ivuga ko ifite amafaranga itabonye abajya bafata, ndetse na private sector nayo ikaba irimo kwifuza kubona amafaranga ariko ntibishoboke. Rero iyi nama ntekereza ko ni inama iri buze kugira imyanzuro nziza, cyangwa se kuko ibyiciro byombi bikeneranye biri ahangaha. Akazi kanjye rero ngiye gukora ni uguhuza ibiganiro kugira ngo tuganire turebe icyaza kuvamo. Turaza gukoresha indimi ebyiri ahangaha, turakoresha Ikinyarwanda n'Icyongereza. Twabikoze kugira ngo buri muntu wese yisanzure, buri umwe ashobore kubaza icyo ashaka kubaza, ndetse na timu ya bank nayo igerageze kudusobanurira. Bigaragara ko niba birimo kuvugwa gutyo hari ikibazo cy'uko hari amakuru atarimo guhuzwa cyangwa amakuru yaba abantu baba badafite. Aho rero noneho iki cyiciro kigiye gukurikira tugiye kuba dufite panelists batatu baturutse kuri guturuka muri bank batandukanye, baraza kutubwira ibikenerwa kugira ngo umuntu ashobore kubona amafaranga. Ariko noneho ndagira ngo mbamenyeshe ko nyuma ya saa sita turi buze kugira session ya B2B, aha hari ibyumba dufite hanze, twagiye tugurupa abantu mu byiciro bitandukanye ari bitatu. Hari sectors zitandukanye, hari industry na service, hari financial products, hari agriculture, hari na infrastructure. Private sector bari ahangaha tuzi neza yuko muri mu byiciro bitandukanye. PSF yakomeje kuboherereza amaformulaire ngo mwuzuze turebe sectors murimo, kugira ngo abantu baze kujya muri groups zabo baganire n'abakozi baturutse muri banke, kugira ngo hari abantu baraza kuba ari bakeya kandi muri sectors zabo barimo kumva neza. Dutekereza ko biri buze kugira umusaruro, muze kubaza ibyo mukeneye kumva byose, ariko bitavuze yuko session ya B2B iri buze kubuza uwaba akeneye kuza kubaza bagiye gutanga ibiganiro. Dufite presenters batatu tugira ngo baturutse kuri kote ya bank, turagira ngo baze, hanyuma nibamara kugera ahangaha baraza kutwibwira neza kugira ngo tumenye abantu tugiye kuganira nabo ndetse n'icyo bakora muri banke, kugira ngo n'uwashaka kubegera azaba azi neza uwo bagiye kuganira nabo n'icyo ashinzwe. The panelists, please, you're invited to come and take your seats. The bank team, please, you're invited to come over. Mr. Richard Please, presenters, before you start presentation, you need, even though Ali Haj has already introduced himself, but we need you guys to introduce in details so that the audience know exactly the people they are going to talk to. You're welcome.
Thank you, Betty. I think we are now in the second session, and I believe we don't have the press anymore. So please, if we can have the first presentation loaded. So as we are doing that, I'll just introduce myself, as Betty has indicated. As I said earlier, I'm Walter Dero, the country economist. Been here for almost 1.5 years. As you heard from Aisa, I think most of us are new. She's almost 2 years. The country program officer is, I think, less than 1 year old. So most of us are new here. Before coming here, I was covering the bank work in Zimbabwe for about 4 years. Before then, I covered the bank work in Kenya for more than 8 years. So that is how long I've been in the bank. Before joining the bank, I worked for various agencies, for example, DFID. And I think it's DFID where I gained a lot of interest in private sector work. When I worked in DFID, we were about 3 economists. We handled different sections of economics, macro, human, and private sector. And I worked more on the private sector side. And through that, I worked very closely with the Kenyan private sector, where I led the PSD strategy of DFID. And through that, I nurtured Kenya Private Sector Alliance. I think most of you have interacted with them. That was my project in DFID. And I believe Kenya Private Sector Alliance is one of the biggest and most successful in this region. I'm very proud of that because even when I worked with the bank, I've partnered with them to do some things, particularly on PPP. So that is me. If we have the first slide, mine will be very brief. It's just about the country's strategy for Rwanda. In every country where we work, all the 54 countries, whether we have a country office or not, the agreement is that we must have a country's strategy paper. The paper is developed and agreed with the government with full participation of the private sector and civil society organizations. We normally have rounds of 5 years of the country's strategy paper. The current one for Rwanda is covering the period 2022 to 2026. It was adopted by the board in the year 2021. I think it was in November. Now, every country's strategy paper must always have priority areas. And I will take you through those in just a minute. But before then, we just need to know what the bank globally is doing so that you know that what we are doing with you here is something which we do with all the countries. As you know, the bank was established in 1964. I think next year we are clocking 60 years. But Rwanda joined the bank in 1974, about 10 years later, not too late. The country office, which Aisa is leading right now, was established in 2006. Not too late because most of the countries, we opened offices around that time, around 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think we are still opening offices in some countries. Currently, we have almost 30 country offices. For Rwanda, as Aisa said earlier on, currently we have ongoing portfolio. That is the number of projects which we have ongoing, about 26 of them. Now, the bank has 2 objectives across the entire continent, which is specified or outlined in the current 10-year strategy ending this year, to which the current country strategy paper is aligned. We are almost launching the next one, which will cover the next 10 years. But the current one has 2 objectives: inclusive growth. We believe that no one should be left behind, whether it is age differential, whether it is geographical differential, whether it is gender. So everything we do has to approach from the objective of inclusive growth. The second one is gradual transition to green growth, where I think Rwanda is one of the leaders in this continent. And around that, we are focusing on building resilience. Unfortunately, we know what has happened in Rwanda recently, but those are the kind of things which we address. managing natural resources, and also focusing on sustainable infrastructure. We also have 5 operational areas: infrastructure development, regional integration, private sector development. Private sector development, and that is why we are here. Private sector development is one of the operational areas of the bank. We also have, of course, governance and skills and development. Then we have 3 areas of special interest. I think you can see them all there. Gender is repeated again, fragile states, and so on and so forth. So away from that, the current country strategy for the country, which was agreed with the government, approved by the board in November 2021, covers 2 priority areas. The first priority area is focusing on reducing the cost of doing business. I believe you all know that Rwanda, as much as the economy is so strong and so good, the cost of doing business is not one of the cheapest. So the country strategy paper is focusing on that. By focusing on clean and sustainable energy, we have quite a couple of projects across the country focusing on energy. Then we have clean drinking water, access to clean drinking water. Again, we have a couple of projects around that. Then we have reducing the cost of transportation. We have a couple of projects around that. In the next slide, I'll give you highlights of some of the key projects we have around that. Now, in priority area 2, we are focusing on skills development. Those of you who listened to the presentation of the census report, you know this is an area where Rwanda needs to do a lot of work, not only at ECD level or primary education, but at secondary education, TVET, and university education levels. Then we also have increased access to finance for the private sector development. And I think that particular outcome is where Aisa, myself, and the team in the office kept talking many, many times. And we had to get the VP, Simon, to come out. We have had our directors come out. In this room, we have 2 of them right now. Just try to address what Aisa said earlier on. Why do we have, for this year, 240 million? We have this objective of developing private sector and 0 uptake. That is why we are in this room today. So in the next slide, just to give you a rundown of how much we have invested in Rwanda. Since we started operation here, we have invested upwards of $2.8 billion US. Ongoing out of that is 1.5 billion, as I mentioned that earlier on. And that is spread across 18 sovereign operations and 8 non-sovereign. And I think the non-sovereign, if I'm not wrong, all of them are closed. But because they are part of the portfolio, we have to list them there. Again, by sector, that is the distribution. The highest is in energy, followed by water, and then the rest of the sectors. Then we have what we call the high fives. Again, we have the distribution there. Those interested in the CSP is available on our website. You can download and get more details. Now for the entire country, how we are spread out, you can see that we have projects in almost every district. I was looking at this yesterday, and then I was seeing that Ramagana is not captured in anything, but I think that is an omission. I don't think we have nothing in Ramagana. There must be something there. Then there's another district in the north, which also has nothing. I trust we must be having something there. So I think Vivian and I will look at this map again. But that is how we are spread out in terms of water, in terms of transport, in terms of skills development, in terms of multi-sector. When it comes to multi-sector, we are spread across almost in the whole country. Now, that is largely public sector. Can we do the same for private sector? I believe PSF members sitting in the room, you are not all working in Kigali. There must be someone working in Nyanza. There must be someone working in some other district. We need to get this map replicated for the private sector. I would be very happy if I came to stand here at the close of the country's strategy paper in 2026 and have this map for public sector, then follow it immediately with a similar map for private sector. And that is why we are here. So in terms of, don't know why it is stuck now. Maybe it is looking for that map for the private sector. Good. Now it agreed to move. Now, between 2022 and 2024, these are the projects we are processing. Some of them are already approved. Some of them are in the process of being approved. And I believe some of the names which are up there, you will be familiar with them. For priority area 1, we have Basebutaro Road. We have upgrading of Ngororero Road. We have Kigali Urban Transport Road, Urban Transport, Akuti. We have Rwanda Transformative Sustainable Water. We have the Rwanda PBO. We have the GIF. All those projects are being processed right now. I think what they will add to the portfolio will be upwards of 700 million, which means by 2024, we should have added on the public sector side about 700 million worth of portfolio, which if all the projects right now will still be ongoing, the portfolio will be about 2.2 billion, almost catching up with Kenya. I think Kenya now has 3 billion. Tanzania has about 2 billion. Ethiopia has about 2.5 billion. So Rwanda will almost be catching up with the countries in the region. In terms of priority area 2, we have skills for employability. I think that should have been approved by now. Then we have centers of excellence, aviation skills. You know, Rwanda is doing a second airport, a bigger airport. And for that airport to operate optimally, we need to have local pilots. So we are processing this project to train local pilots so that we can replace the international pilots who are flying the Rwanda Air. In terms of knowledge, last year we completed Rwanda gender profile. This year we have 2 significant studies, the Rwanda growth model. We will be embarking on preparation of NST2. So for the bank, we are trying to look at what will be the growth options for the country up to the year 2032. That is not only for the government, we will also be working on midterm review of our country's strategy. So we'll use that to guide in terms of our formulation of the remaining phase of our country's strategy. Then we have what we call infrastructure flagship report, basically putting the entire public infrastructure and asking questions. Are we investing optimally? If we are not investing optimally, how can we invest optimally? That is the purpose of that study. And we are happy to partner with other players. Already, we are partnering with many of them. And I believe private sector colleagues, some of you work already with IFC, with JICA. The bank, when we make the presentation on the products we have, you will hear terms like lead arranger. Lead arranger simply means being in front and mobilizing all these other players to give you more money. So we can give you a little money, but then we mobilize the other players to give you more money on top of what we are able to mobilize. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So key takeaways, if you have to take something away. This year, we have 242 million. Can we absorb it all by the end of this year? Number one. Number two, in 2026, when we complete our country's strategy paper, can we have that map replicated across the country? You heard that Rwanda portfolio is about 1.5 billion. In some of the countries, one single private sector deal can be bigger than that. I hope my colleagues will cover that in their presentations, which means you can work in a country where one private sector player has a portfolio with the bank bigger than the entire work we are doing in Rwanda. Thank you. I end my presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Walter. Now, can you load the second presentation? So again, my name is Elhaj Ba. I'm Chief Policy Economist at the bank in the Office of the Vice President in charge of private sector. I've been in this office for the last 4 years. Before that, I was in the research department trying to assess what is the impact of our investment on private sector. Right? So I will go quickly to present you our private sector development strategy and also highlight how you can work with us the key, the investment criteria and so on, and also tell you what we are doing in some of these areas. So here's what I will talk about. The first one is, why do we need a private sector development strategy? Walter already said it, and Abdu and Isa. For us in the bank, we want to help Africa develop. And today, we all know that Africa cannot develop without the private sector. That is a key. We know that, right? So if you look at what the private sector is contributing, even before the COVID-19, you see that the private sector already contribute a lot in Africa's development, right? About 90% of the jobs it's created by the private sector, right? And more than 70% of output is by the private sector. So, but also when we look at the current context, post-COVID-19, what do we see? With the COVID-19, there was a lot of borrowing by government to deal with the pandemic. So they have less fiscal space to invest because we already have a big infrastructure deficit. So how do you deal with that infrastructure? The government don't have the fiscal space. We have high levels of unemployment or underemployment, which, if we don't tackle well, will be the undoing of the progress we are making. Because Africa is a young continent, we need to create jobs. And the good news is that our young population is more and more educated. They have the skills. They are benefiting from technology. So how do we create the jobs of the future so we can serve this young population? There are problems of food insecurity. It just took one war in Ukraine to highlight that Africa needs to do something to have food security in the continent. It doesn't make any sense for Africa to import food from the rest of the world because we have the land, we have the rain, we have everything required really to have food security in the continent. So what can we do to transform agriculture so we can have food security? In all of these areas, it's not government only the answer. Of course, the government needs to be involved, right? But the government needs to work with the private sector so the private sector can provide the answers, right? So to create jobs, we need this private sector. We need the private sector to transform the agricultural sector in the continent. We need to industrialize the continent. The idea that we can keep exporting raw material and import manufactured goods, we've done it for 60 years. We know it will not lead to wealth creation in the continent. So that's a done debate. We know we need to industrialize as a continent, and for that, we need the private sector, right? So, as I said, the infrastructure deficit, the government, many of them have been investing a lot, but today, given the context, we need the private sector to invest in infrastructure. Otherwise, we cannot have the power, the roads, and the port and transport, all the transport necessary. Okay? So when we talk about private sector in the bank, really what we are focusing is on private sector development, which is a larger term where we are looking at everything required for the creation and growth of private sector. So it's not only the businesses we are looking at, but the businesses operate in an environment. We want to make sure that this environment is conducive to business. So we have the upstream operations that we do where we work with government to make sure this environment is good. But we need also the institutional level and at the midstream, basically, where you have the ecosystem that is created. Sometimes you need to help facilitate the value chains, their development and so on. But at the end of the day, you have private sector, somebody need to start a business, need to invest, need to hire people and so on. So we need to also to support these private sector entities. So the bank is involved in all of these levels, and when we support the private sector entities at the bank, we call them non-sovereign operations, where the operation is not guaranteed by a government. It's a loan or a guarantee or something that we engage with the private sector entity itself. So my colleague Richard will talk about all the instruments that we provide to the private sector. Yeah. In 2022, we approved our new private sector development strategy, which is really an umbrella strategy, because in the bank we are guided by many strategies. We have the 10-year strategy, we have the high five that I'm sure you are all aware, and many other sectoral strategy. And each of these, private sector is included there, because we know you cannot do a sector, develop a sector without the private sector, right? So, but we still need to have a guidance, something that brings all this together to make it cohesive so we can be efficient the way we work, right? So this is why we have this private sector development strategy, is to have this cohesivity, right? Now, what is the vision of this private sector development strategy? So we want a model for Africa's development that is led by the private sector. You already said this is necessary. And youth and women at its core. Today, we have many young population, and we are all also recognizing that you cannot leave women behind. They represent more than 50% in general in every country. So you cannot leave them behind and think you can develop, right? So youth and women at the core, and anchored in industrialization and powered by technology and innovation, right? So as I said, we are focusing on industrialization. We think it's critical for the continent, for its development, and advances in technology should help us achieve this, okay? So the objective is really to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union Agenda 2063. So this is the vision and the objective. Now, what are the pillars? So the pillars of the strategy, there are 3, and you'll see it is really looking at the 3 streams I talked about before, the upstream, midstream, and then the downstream. At the upstream, it's the business environment. So we want to support countries to put in place conducive business environment. But in doing this, we don't want just to focus in general business environment that have been done for a long time, because we had a strategy before this one, and that was just business environment. So we know if we focus on specific issues, we have better results. So this is what we are trying to do in this new strategy. So we'll have landmark reforms in high growth sectors. So in each country, you need to look at where this country can what sector can help this country grow, what are the bottlenecks, what we need to do to transform that sector. So this is how we're going to approach things in this strategy. We also recognize that we need the private sector in infrastructure. So of course, public-private partnerships are important. So we support countries in this. And of course, in industrialization, as we said, we have industrial policies, and also taking advantage of technology to help government facilitate issuing licenses and certificates and so on. So in every government, how do we pay taxes and so on. Really, if we can make the government more effective, that can help the private sector. So these are some of the areas we'll work on. The second one is infrastructure. So facilitate access to integrated economic infrastructure. Look at infrastructure here as an input for private sector. If you are a manufacturer, you need affordable energy for you to be competitive, right? You need, if you want to export, you need access to either transport or port for you to be able to export in an efficient manner. So we will support these type of sectors, transport, power, and broadband for innovation, so we can improve that environment. We also need to look at special economic zone. Here again, we want to move away from just wide areas. So look at how can we have an area that we can develop where we can bring in many things, so we can have economies of scale. So you have economic zone, export zone, and so on. We've been developing a lot of agri-processing zone that our colleagues in agriculture are trying to do in many countries in the continent, because we seen that is important. Okay, so those are some of the areas. And the third one is to promote enterprise development. This is the area at the downstream where we work with private sector entities directly. So here there are several things we'll do depending on type of the actors, right? In private sector, you have large businesses. Most of our instruments are designed for large businesses. Large business that can transform. You have large companies that can develop a whole value chain, right? They can be linked even not just within the country, but across borders. So we want to support these large companies. But we also know in the continent that the majority of businesses are SMEs, right? So we develop tools to make sure that SMEs also can be supported through various partnerships that I will talk about later. And we support them to be integrated in value chains. And the last bit is about innovation and entrepreneurship. Because today, with the young population and with unemployment, we want to make sure that young people can start businesses, even they have the know-how and the technologies that they can use these days. So we want to create ecosystem that can facilitate this. And also the fintech ecosystem that is really transforming many sectors, as we've seen even during the COVID, that Africa was able to take advantage of some of these tech and innovation system, right? So these are the three pillars. So the pillars are from the upstream, working with government. Midstream is really the economic infrastructure that is required to lower the input cost for private sector. And the third is supporting the private sector itself, whether it's large companies, so through loans, guarantees, equity, and so on, or SMEs and entrepreneurship through various partnerships with the financial sector mostly, so we can have access to finance and integration, also access to market in value chain for the SMEs so they can develop. Okay. Next, I talked about the PPP. So as part of supporting the private sector and private sector participation in infrastructure, we developed a PPP framework because we realize we have this huge infrastructure deficit. You have funds that are ready to invest, but where are the projects? And we are finding out that governments are not necessarily well equipped to design and prepare those projects that can be structured as PPPs and to make it work. So this is why we created this framework, so we can support the government to do a better job in bringing in more PPPs in the continent. So we have 3 areas that we work on. So the first one is on the operational and regulatory framework for PPPs. The second one is on technical assistance, so we can support really pipeline development, structuring PPP units, and so on. And the third one is, of course, using our private sector window to support PPP projects, which we have done in a number of countries, but of course we need to increase this, as we said, to deal with the infrastructure deficit. Now, I'll talk about how do you work with us on the private sector side. So it's the third, on the third pillar. We have an eligibility criteria if you want to borrow, let's say, from the bank. So the first one is you need to be incorporated in a member country. So this is not an issue. If you have a business in Rwanda, which is a member country, that's good. So the second one is it needs to be a private sector entity, right? Majority owned by private sector, or it can be a government entity, but it is financial, that has financial and governance autonomy. So basically, they are not, it's a government entity, but run independently, right? So that we can, you can still access the private sector window. And in that, there is no government guarantee, right? No government guarantee in whatever support we provide. The third one is that you need to have, of course, competent management, have good corporate governance, and comply with all our fiduciary rules and regulations. And one of the things also to note is that when we invest, we don't, we have limits, right? So for a project finance or corporate loan, for instance, we invest maximum 33% of the total cost of the project. So that means other financiers need to come, and also the sponsors need to provide equity. If it's a financial institution that wants a line of credit or something, we cannot give you more than 50% of your shareholder equity at any point of time when we support you. And also, if it's a equity participation, it's 25%, that's the upper limit, right? So what's the investment criteria? Remember that we are a development bank. So one of the things is we want to have impact, the development impact, right? That's why we are in this private sector business. So, of course, we want to maximize impact, but I can add here that this is not difficult for a project in general to demonstrate that the project can have an impact on development. And also, you need to be aligned with the strategic priorities for the country. So, for instance, whenever we have a project, we need to make sure it's aligned with the Rwanda country strategy paper, right? The project must be credit-worthy and commercially viable, so, and have long-term sustainability, because we know that you cannot have impact if the project is not financially viable. We need to have environmental and social responsibility. This is very important to us. You saw in our 10-year strategy, one of them is transition to green growth. So in everything we do, environmental and social responsibility is very important. And also, of course, we need to provide to show that there is additionality in what we're doing. We're not a commercial bank, and we don't want to compete with them. We always want to ask, why do we need to come in? Either providing long-term capital and so on. So we have our justification. And the last thing here is that in general, our interventions start at 10 million USD. Okay? So this is for large project because here, you know, as I said, we have a threshold of 33%. So if the project is 10 million, so if our intervention is 10 million, so the project is already at 30 million, right? More than 30 million. So it's for large project, but as you'll see, we have other tools to support smaller project. And sometimes for some strategic project with high development impact, we can invest lower than this $10 million, right? Yeah. So what's the application? What do you do? So we have some a package. So basically, the way it works, you send us a proposal, a summary proposal. Here's what we want to do. We look at it. So let's say if it's in agribusiness, Richard's team will look at it, say, yeah, this sounds interesting. Then we can move forward. So then they will ask for documentation so we can go through the processing steps within the bank. And some of the things they ask are here, but this is not exhaustive. But really it's a conversation and a partnership with the investment officers to guide really the private sector partner to say what is necessary for us to get the board approval for that project. Yeah. Now, I'm going to talk about the SMEs because I said, you know, our standard financing is for large companies, but we know SMEs, it's the majority of the private sector in the continent. So we have different tools for us to support the SMEs, and it depends on really, we're trying to address the bottlenecks or the constraint to the SME development. If you look at across countries in the continent, even in the world, so you can say the main ones are enabling environment, capacity of the SMEs and the skills of employees. You have access to market linked to infrastructure, logistics, and so on. And of course, access to finance. That is also important, whether the access or the cost of that financing itself. So we try to come up with programs that address many of these, right? So what do we do at the bank to support SMEs? The first one, I'll say we support the government, right? So we make sure that the enabling environment for the SMEs is important. So we have some programs, let's say Jobs for Youth, where we support government to support SMEs and create jobs for young people. And we try to help in some value chains so we can create SMEs and integrate SMEs in those. Second one is the supporting specialized institution, because we are a large bank, development bank. We are in headquarters in Abidjan. Our team in any country is small enough that it cannot take on individual loans, right? So the team that I lead here, they cannot manage, let's say, 100 SME loans of $50,000 or so, right? So we need to work with some institutions that are created to do this. So some of them are development institutions that are either country-based or they are regional. So we have the Afrexim Bank, the Africa, so Afrexim is mostly on trade finance. We have Africa Guarantee Fund that guarantee loans for SMEs for the financial institutions. We have many regional and national development institutions where we are either a shareholder or we provide them some lines of credit so they can on lend. But the key partner for SMEs, for us, it's the working with financial intermediaries. Because we think that commercial banks are the closest to the SMEs. They are holding the bank account of those SMEs. They understand they have this relationship. So we want to support these financial intermediaries so they can lend to the SMEs. So we do a lot of lines of credit to these financial intermediaries. But we are also doing more. We're recognizing that it's not just giving money to a bank, commercial bank. That will not just solve the problem. So we bringing in technical assistance so we can help that bank structure its SME business. So they understand how to lend the SMEs. Sometimes we even have technical assistance that can support some of the SMEs so they can access financing from these commercial banks, because we know it's also important, right? So you need to work on the supply side of the fund, but also on the demand side, because often when you ask commercial banks, why you not lending to SMEs, they tell you the SMEs are not well prepared. They don't have good good application packets and so on. So we try to build in capacity on both sides so that can be tackled. And the other way is through equity. So we invest a lot on private equity, venture capital, and so on, that is trying to bring in the necessary equity to SMEs so they can invest from small amount to a bit larger amount. And even today, before I came, I looked at the equity investment of some of our investees. They invested here in Rwanda, right? So I think there are 4 businesses in Rwanda that benefited from our investment in the equity business. The last one I already talked about a little bit, is the technical assistance. So we recognize that capacity is an issue, right? So we can come, let's say we finance a large agro-processor. This agro-processor need the farmers and some of these SMEs to supply them inputs. But there is no capacity. So we can bring in technical assistance to support the capacity for those so they can integrate this value chain. Or even for the financial intermediaries do this. So we have a lot of financing for capacity building, so we can try to raise this capacity for SMEs and financial intermediaries. So here I just want to show you some of the programs that we have. I will not go in details for this. We have a program we call Africa SME program that work with financial intermediaries, smaller banks to address the SME lending. We also developing some linkage programs where it's not only the access to finance, but you need to deal with the capacity and also the access to markets where you link in large businesses and SMEs. And there is also a large program that we have that is trying to focus on women-owned businesses. So it's a large project that supports the access to finance, technical assistance, and also enabling environment for women-owned businesses, which is, over the last 2-3 years, we have already invested more than $1 billion in this program to support women-owned businesses. Yeah. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning again. I'm Richard Ofrimante. I'm the Division Manager for Agriculture and Rural Finance, but currently the Acting Director for Agricultural Finance and Rural Development. I've been in the bank for about, 13 and a half years. My first 7 years in the bank I spent in the Treasury Department, where we led the development of financial products. And of course, I'm going to be speaking about financial products in this particular discussion. Then I moved over to agri-finance, where I support private sector-led agricultural businesses on the continent. So today's presentation will take us through, let me step down. Today's presentation will take us through five key points. I'll speak on the bank group, I'll speak on the lending instruments, I'll speak on guarantee products, and I'll speak on equity. But when I get to trade finance, I'm going to call my colleague Bernard to help me out. So Bernard just changed his face. He wasn't expecting it. Let's have this conversation be very interactive. I know you've been sitting in through 10 o'clock. If it's not interactive, I'm sure everybody will doze off. And especially when we get into these lending instruments, it sometimes gets, finance heavy and a little bit technical. So just raise up your hand, and I'll walk up to you, and then you can speak to the question that you would want to ask. So let's make it interactive. So I think the first thing that we need to know is to understand what the African Development Bank is. In most instances, we all speak about the African Development Bank, the African Development Bank. However, the African Development Bank group in itself, it's made up of 3 distinct legal separate entities. We have the African Development Bank Group. This is the AAA rated institution, and in most instances, this is the face of the bank, where most people speak to the African Development Bank, the African Development Bank. This is the face of the bank, having membership of our 81 member countries, with both regional member countries and non-regional member countries, capitalized to about 221 billion, and is the AAA rated bank. Then we have the African Development Fund. The African Development Fund is the concessional window of the bank. The concessional window of the bank caters to low-income countries. And the next slide, you would see how we differentiate between what we call a low-income country and what we call a middle-income country. But then the African Development Fund caters to low-income countries of the bank, where we provide concessional financing. Concessional financing meaning interest rates which are below 100 basis points, 50 basis points, extended tenors which can extend up to 30 years and above. So that shows the level of concessionality in these loans that are provided out of the African Development Fund. Then we have the Nigeria Trust Fund, which was established by the Nigeria government in 1976, and also cuts across and provides some level of concessional resources, as well as market-based resources. So then, what's the classification? To be able to understand what country is able to access the African Development Bank window, which is the concessional window of the bank, or the African Development Fund window, the African Development Bank window, which is the market-based financing window of the bank for middle-income countries, or the African Development Fund window, which provides concessional financing, 2 categories are actually utilized: per capita income, as well as your credit worthiness for non-concessional financing. So they are grouped into 4 buckets. So if you are an ADF country, meaning an African Development Fund only country, that means your per capita income for 2 consecutive years is below 1,165, and at the same time too, you are not credit worthy for non-concessional financing. So that's the first bucket. Then there are countries that are called gap countries. These are, okay, let me go to the next one so that you understand. There are countries that are called blend countries. These are countries that can easily access or can access both windows. Their capital consumption, their per capita income is above the 1165, and they are also creditworthy for non-concessional financing. However, there's a graduation phase that you go through. And these countries are now going through that sort of financing phase where they are able to access both ADF and ADB type loans. I would not want to delve into this because this is more related to sovereign borrowing, but I just wanted to give context or provide context on the different clarifications on countries that are able to access both the ADF window and then the ADB window. Today's discussion, I will not focus on this side. The first part, which is the sovereign and non-sovereign guaranteed operations, these are just for sovereign. Today's discussion is mainly for private sector. So we would focus more on the non-sovereign guaranteed. When we say non-sovereign guaranteed, transactions or projects that are financed without the support of any sovereign, meaning that it's only private sector-led interventions. I believe my colleague El Haj had spoken to the project evaluation criteria. So when you send a project to the bank, the first thing that we look at on a high-level basis, these are the three parameters that we will look at. High-level basis, what is the additionality and impact in terms of development? Because we're a development bank. Every project that we finance has to have some development impact as well as the additionality, meaning why should the bank be involved in this particular project? Can't it be financed out of commercial lender space? So we look at it, job creation. Is there any job creation? What are the number of youth that are going to be employed? What is the gender basis? How many women are going to be employed by the bank financing this particular operation? What is the financial return? What's the impact on growth? You know, then we go to the next stage. We look at solvency, commercial viability, and financial viability. We quickly look at your financials. Do you have the capacity to repay the obligations if you are advanced the facility from the bank? What are some of the strong prospects for financial profitability if we are to go ahead with this particular project? Then we also look at the environmental and social impact. This is very, very important for us. Every project that is financed out of the bank's facilities is covered under an ESI framework. So this is a very important point in most or all transactions that's financed from the bank. Any questions? Okay. Now, let's start looking at the bank's financial products. I think this is where most of you are interested in. That's why we are all here, to really understand what the bank can offer. Let me let everything come out so that we just go through it. Good. So the bank has about 6 different lending instruments. And within these lending instruments, there are various categories of lending instruments. So let's just start first with the sovereign, the lending instruments. We have the sovereign guaranteed loans, which we are not going to speak about. These are loans that are directed specifically for sovereign, our African countries. Non-sovereign guaranteed loans, these are going to be the focus of today's discussions. Loans that are directed towards just the private sector. Then we have local currency loans, and the first presenter had actually spoken to the fact that how do we mitigate foreign currency risk? You know, and I think when we get to going into the local currency loans, you will see how the bank is able to provide local currency loans to be able to mitigate against what? FX type related risk. Then we have loan syndications where we act as mandated lead arrangers. We bring other commercial partners and other DFIs into the spectrum to finance very large loans. I mean, the bank's balance sheet cannot do all. So we definitely want to leverage our limited capital and bring in other financiers to help us to execute some of the projects that we do. Then we have risk management products. Risk management products help us mitigate or manage market-related risk, both interest rate and then currency-related risks. The beauty of the African Development Bank's loans to the private sector is that we can manage both floating and fixed rate loans, meaning that if you access a facility from the bank on a floating rate basis, and your expectations of interest rates is that interest rates are going to rise, are going to go up in the future, you would be able to come to the bank for us to fix your loans for you, so that you have a fixed rate for the tenor of your loan, so that you don't think about rising interest rates. And this was an important concept in the last 5 years, last 3 years or so, when interest rates were so low. You know, Euribor was basically negative. You had to pay banks for you to deposit your money in central banks. Euribor was basically negative. Those who were financially savvy actually approached the bank during those times to fix their loans. So they have loans which are basically fixed at those rates. And now with the central bank, the Fed raising rates, European Central Bank also raising rates, rates are quite high these days, which is leading to the expectation that inflation is going to lead us into a recessionary period. So we are able to manage your loans within these risk management products. Then we have our guarantee products, and we'll get into in depth into them, where we have the partial risk guarantee, which is able to manage the perception of risk, which is facilitated by government. So it manages more government-related type of risk, protects against currency inconvertibility, expropriation, nationalization, and deprivation. So you would have private sector entities. Maybe I'm a Rwandan, I'm a big businessman, I want to go into Congo. However, I'm thinking about the political environment of Congo. What if I put my assets in Congo and the government decides to expropriate my assets? How am I able to protect against this? You come to the African Development Bank and we wrap it with a partial risk guarantee instrument, which would protect you against the specific political related risk that you want to manage. Currency, expropriation, nationalization, or deprivation. Then we have the partial credit guarantee instrument, which protects against all defaults of debt, whether it being political or it being credit related. So for instance, a bank wants to advance a facility to you, but the bank is not too sure about your credit fundamentals. The bank can approach the African Development Bank to wrap it with our partial credit guarantee. We take a portion of the risk because we want to enforce some level of development income or development outcome in a particular environment. And we think by going through your investment, we would be able to achieve that level of development outcome. We would be able to provide you with a partial credit guarantee, which will protect the bank against your default on the facility that's been extended by the bank. We have portfolio guarantees, risk-sharing facilities. Then we have equities. We also can invest in direct equity investments into businesses. However, that is more on a strategic level when we do direct equities. Most of our investments that we've done in the equity space, although we've done a lot of direct equity investments, mainly to set up strategic financial institutions on the continent, we've done a ton in equity investments through private equity funds, where we invest in private equity funds for the private equity funds to invest in small and medium scale enterprises. So that's also a conduit to what my colleague El Haj had mentioned in terms of the support to SMEs. One area that we utilize to be able to invest in SMEs is to go through private equity funds, where we provide them with capital, equity capital, and they finance or invest in SMEs. Then we have trade finance facilities, and then we have technical assistance funds. So now let's speak directly to the loan product for the private sector. The loan product for the private sector is called the fixed spread loan. It's called the fixed spread loan because there's a fixed spread over our reference rate. The bank's reference rate in USD is the SOFR, Secured Overnight Financing Rate. Originally, it was the 6-month LIBOR, but you all know the LIBOR has been phased out. So we now invest over the SOFR. That means our reference rate in the US dollar is the SOFR. In terms of maturities, we can go as long as, 15 years. And this is where our financial additionality lies. You realize that commercial entities are able to give and take 3 to 5 years in terms of extending facilities. But when you are financing large infrastructure projects, you cannot cut it or you cannot make it with short-term finance. You expose yourself to a lot of refinancing and liquidity risk. So the bank's financial additionality in this space is that we are able to extend our facilities up to 15 years. And in some instances, with the clearance of our credit committees, we can push the limits up to 18, depending on the underlying assets that we are financing, and it's mostly in the infrastructure space. Grace periods, we can go up to 5 years. 5 years is only interest payments, and the loan starts to amortize after the 5th year. So the grace period is straight 5 years. In terms of the currencies, hard currencies, we do the Euro, USD, JPY, in terms of currencies, we do the Euro, USD, JPY, ZAR, and then local currencies. When we come to local currencies, we are able to invest or provide local currencies in 12 African countries, 12 African currencies, including the Rwandese francs, including the Rwandese francs. What it means is that if you need to do a project in this country and you want to mitigate, your revenues are basically in Rwandese francs, instead of accessing hard currency financing, which exposes you to currency risk, you come to the bank who are able to provide you with Rwandese francs. And I would go through the methodologies that we can utilize to be able to provide you with the Rwandese francs. But I just want to assure you that the Rwandese francs, in addition to other 11 African currencies, is part of the local currencies that we can avail. In North Africa, we can do the Egyptian pound. In West Africa, we can do the ZAF and the ZOF, and then Ghana cedi, Nigeria naira. When we move to East Africa, we can do the Tanzania shilling, the Uganda shilling, and then the Kenyan shilling, as well as the Rwandese francs. When we go to South Africa, we do the South African rand. Indeed, the South African rand, quote unquote, we treat it as a hard currency because we run treasuries in this particular currency. So we can do up to 12 in this instance. I think North Africa, we can do the Egyptian pound, if I've not mentioned that. Then interest rate features, free option to fixed upon disbursement. This I've already spoken to, where if you think rates are going to go up, you can fix your base rate over the tenor of the facility. We have some additional fees that go along with our loans. We have commitment fees of 50 to 100 basis points. Because when the loan is signed, we commit capital against the facility that we are going to provide to you. We hold capital against it. We've made a commitment to you that come disbursement, we would avail this facility to you. So we also need to be compensated for holding that risk capital for you. So we charge commitment fees ranging from 50 to 100 bips. Then we have front-end fees. Our front-end fees is fixed at 100%, 100 basis points. That means 1% of the loan amount. The front-end fees covers the bank's input into processing the loans, all the administrative work that we do, everything, putting the whole loan together. So we also have to be compensated for that, So We also charge front-end fees, which is basically 100 bips or 1% of the loan amount. Then we have what we call the appraisal fees. Appraisal fees goes to cover the cost of doing the due diligence on the underlying project. And that is project specific, and it also depends on, the complexity of the project. It depends on the number of people the number of staff that we throw at project. There are projects that, are so complicated. We need external parties, we need external technical advisors to help us. Sometimes we have to rope it into our appraisal fees, the cost of travel in and out of the countries to be able to appraise and do due diligence. So we charge appraisal fees, which is loan dependent. And then supervision fee is as at when needed. For really complex projects where there's heavy supervision, we basically tag along a supervision fee. But it's as when it's needed. Then finally, we have what we call the prepayment premium, which it's technical, I don't want to get into, but what it means is that when we fix your loan, when you have a floating rate loan, you come to us and we fix your loan. We fix it with a market counterparty. We use our AAA sort of front. So we go to the capital markets, to international commercial banks, and we say, look, I have a floating rate loan over an 8-year period. I want you to convert this floating rate loan into a fixed rate loan over this particular 8-year period. So this is done through an underlying swap. So you as the customer, you do not see anything. We do it within our treasury function. So if at any point in time, you decide to come to the bank and say, hey, I want you to unwind the swap. I no longer need a fixed rate. I just want to get out of this. We also have to go back to our commercial lenders to unwind the underlying swap. And in some instances, and in most instances, there would be a prepayment premium. The prepayment premium meaning that no client would come to the bank to unwind the swap when the rates are in his favor. Because if rates go up, you had originally fixed your rate at 6%. Over an 8-year period. And the rates go down to let's say 4%. And now you say, oh, I need to come and unwind this swap so that I can get a floating rate loan because the rates are now at 4%. Obviously, you are doing it to take advantage of an arbitrage opportunity. And there's always a prepayment premium that you would pay. The right-hand side just shows some of the loans that we've given out: IDC, DBSC, Netbank, corporate loans. We've done Transnet, XA Taxi, and a whole bunch of other ones which are not listed out here. So now local currency loans, and I think I need to be a little bit fast, not to waste too much time. What are the objectives for our local currency loans? And I think one of the participants at the EID had mentioned it, to reduce our exposure to foreign currency risk. Usually that's the key. That's the key for our clients. They need to manage their exposure. So we are able to provide local currency loans through different strategies. Either we come into the country and issue a bond. So we issue a bond in local currency, we just on-lend the proceeds to the project. That's one simple way. And that would also depend on whether you have developed capital markets. If you have developed debt markets in your country, we can easily come in, issue a bond, and then just lend the proceeds of the bond to the project that we are financing. Then we can also do what we call a synthetic local currency loan, where we replicate the local currency loan through a non-deliverable forward. So this is more from the derivative markets. We just synthetically replicate a local currency loan and provide the funds to you. Then we can also do a cross-currency swap, where we go to a bank, we give the bank dollars, they give us Rwandese francs, we take the Rwandese francs, and we on-lend to yourselves. So we can easily do it through a cross-currency swap. Or the final one is just borrowing from a local bank. We come into the local bank, into the local community, we identify an investment-grade type bank, we borrow the local currency from the bank as the African Development Bank, and we on-lend the facilities directly to the project. The risk management products, we can do interest rate swap to help you manage your interest-related risk. We can do currency, cross-currency swaps in instances where, you know, your export market, hypothetical, I'm just giving an example, your export market is is Europe. So you are basically contracted a euro-based loan. However, your export market changes on you within the tenor of the loan, and now you are now exporting to the US. Your revenues are now US-based. You can come to the African Development Bank, and then we can use a cross-currency swap through our risk management product to change the characteristics of your loan, where you now pay us what? US dollars to finance your underlying facility. So these are some of the benefits of the African Development Bank dealing with our competitive advantage over a lot of commercial banks in terms of what we can offer from a loan product perspective. Then we have what we call syndication, where we do what we call A and B loans. The beauty of this particular strategy is that the African Development Bank becomes the lender on record. And what it means is that, and I threw an example, I think that would be a better example. For instance, we need to mobilize $500 million. The $500 million we would split into what we call the A and then the B loan. The African Development Bank would be the holder of the A loan, where out of the 5 million, hypothetically, we would be able to provide, let's say, 100 million. The 400 million which is left would be syndicated through a B loan. And commercial lenders would want to participate under our B loan facility because they are covered under the umbrella of our what we call the preferred creditor status. The preferred creditor status meaning that in any instances of stress where an entity or a sovereign cannot easily make up his loan obligations, payments, they would rather pay the African Development Bank and default against other creditors. And you can take the example of Ghana, you can take the example of Zambia. In current circumstances where the Zambian government is actually negotiating with bilateral lenders, you know, following the default of the underlying facility, but then would not default under any loan that has been provided by multilaterals like the African Development Bank or the World Bank or the IMF to some extent. Because in times of stress, we play a counter-cyclical role. Whilst others are withdrawing from the market or expecting high yields from you, we are stepping in and providing you the finances to enable that you survive. So we have the preferred creditor status umbrella. So by lending under this particular structure, commercial lenders are also protected because we are the lender of record. So, you know, the preferred creditor status also benefits these entities. Any questions to date? It's frozen. Okay, good. Then we have what we call parallel loans. So I've spoken about the syndication. So these are just different loan structures where we utilize these loans for co-financing purposes, you know. So what we have what we call the parallel loans, where we work with other commercial entities or other DFIs to provide financing to a particular borrower. So this is the structure, and it's just to be able to leverage our limited capital, and it also allows other commercial lenders and other DFIs to come into the loan or into the facility at different rates. we would be able to provide our rate at X%, they would come in at Y%, they would come in at a different tenor than we're able to come in. So using the parallel loan structure also allows us to leverage the limited capital and also at the same time be able to meet the obligations of the project. I'm not going to go into this. This is just detailed examples that we've provided, but I believe we would be able to share the financial presentations with yourselves. Once you put in your email address and everything, I think all these can easily be shared. So this sheet just shows some of the selected transactions that we've done in the syndicated space. We've done Lake Turkana, 475, we've done Transnet, we've done ESCOM, we've done Redstone, we've done the Ghana Cocoa Board. So if you look at the underlining I would say quantum of the financing, these are very large transactions which cannot just be financed by one entity. So we need to bring in other financiers within our syndication structure to be able to finance some of these large quantum loans. These are some of the success stories in terms of what we've done in the agribusiness space. We did a loan for Ghana Cocoa Board in the agribusiness space. We'll not get into the transaction, but it just provides an idea of some of the transactions that we've done. Then, additionally, we have other co-financing structures that we use in-house. So the African Development Bank in itself, although we have our own ordinary resources that we finance projects, we also have donor-related financing, or we also manage other financing on behalf of other financiers in-house. So we contribute some of their financing into some of the projects that we do. So we have the Enhanced Private Sector Facility. There's a co-financing structure with the Japan International Agency, JICA. We have the Africa Growing Together Fund, special fund set up by the Chinese Public Bank of China, 2 billion. We finance or co-finance alongside the transactions that we do. We have the EU, and then we have the AFD financing agreement that allows us to do joint financing. But this slide just shows you the depth of our reach in terms of bringing other financiers on board to achieve a particular purpose. And I've not even spoken to some of the funds which allow for blend financing. In instances where we are able to combine market type rates with concessional financing to ensure that the private sector investor has a blended finance structure which effectively lowers the interest rate output that goes out to the transaction. Then we move on to what we call our guarantee products. And, the concept is, why would we even try to provide guarantees? But, the risk perception on this continent is far greater than other places. For people or for investors to come onto this continent, they sometimes need credit enhancement instruments or risk mitigation instruments to enable them come and do projects in this part of our world. So the bank provides guarantees. It allows, us to mitigate the risk perception on the continent, and also allows us to, diminish to some extent that high risk environment. You come into Africa to do a transaction, instead of charging, if they do the same transaction in, let's say, in South Asia, for instance, they would charge 4%. But then the moment they're doing the same transaction on the African continent, 4% then jumps to 8%. So the perception of risk, they are taking on an additional risk premium just to do a transaction in Africa. So we provide these guarantees to step down that level of risk premium. So the bank covers risk that the market is not willing to bear. And that's exactly what we do. You know, it allows us to provide new sources of financing. It allows improved financing terms. You know, if with the African Development Bank guarantee as a wrap, your terms would be better in the commercial space than if you were to go to finance a transaction on an individual basis. It allows us to, you know, take on risk that the market is not willing to bear, in the sense that political related risk, we take those political related risks, the market is able to take on the credit or the commercial type risk. So we have two types of guarantees in play. We have the partial risk guarantee, which covers political related risk. These are risks that can easily be managed by the political environment. These are risks that are, you know, politically reinforced, such that currency inconvertibility and non-transferability, and you have that going on in, let's say, if you go to Nigeria these days, it's hard to get Forex out of the country. You know, you may do a lot of investments out there, but now when you need to repatriate your funds, it's just difficult to get those Forex out of the country. We can put in a PRG to cover the currency inconvertibility, to ensure that at the time of converting your currency into hard currency and taking it out of the country, you would be able to have access to the hard currency. This we need to put in before the project. It's not after the fact. This is always before the fact. You cannot, you know, put in your transaction without a PRG and then step in and say, oh, now I want a PRG, when, you know, the risk has already catalyzed or crystallized. We can also do confiscation, expropriation, nationalization, political force majeure risk. And look at political force majeure risk. Sudan. This is a critical example of a transaction in Sudan. If somebody had invested in Sudan and wrapped it with our partial risk guarantee instrument, they would be getting a payout now. You know, they would be totally protected in this current environment of where, you know, Sudan is in flames to some extent, quote unquote. So political force majeure, we can easily cover that against using our partial risk instruments. There's also breach of contract, and then non-honoring of contractual payment obligations, especially where those of you running independent power plants, where you have power purchase agreements with government. If the government decide not to honor the power purchase agreement, and you have a wrap under the non-honoring of contractual payment obligations, we can easily step in and then make you whole. So these are some of the benefits of that facility. Then we have the partial credit guarantee instrument, where it covers commercial debt against all risk, irrespective of the underlying cause, whether it's political or whether it's commercial related. So this just shows how, you know, the PCG or the guarantee structures can be, we can structure it in any way. It's just a matter of how we structure it. You know, we can use it on individual projects. We can use it for a portfolio or transactions. We can use it to cover just principal, depending on your needs. We can cover just interest, depending on your needs, or we can cover both principal and interest, depending on your needs. This is an example that we threw in there, and this example is for a telephone company in Cameroon. The underlying transaction needed 5-year money. However, the commercial entities were just willing to give 2-year money. But by providing what we call a tenor extension guarantee, that means the African Development Bank would cover from year 2 to year 5. It allowed the commercial entity to now extend the facility for what? 5 years. Originally, without the PCG, they were willing just to do 2 years. But by providing the tenor extension guarantee, on the last 3 years of the loan, the commercial entity is now willing to step up and say, okay, look, once I have the AAA rated guarantee backing me, I would be able to extend the facility to the project for 5 years. Because at the end of the day, when there's a default from year 3 to year 5, it's on the back of the African Development Bank. So this is just one example of that. Then we have equity. We also invest in direct equity. It would interest you to know that some of these entities were set up by the African Development Bank, or we had put in large amounts of equity to set these entities up. Afri-Exim, which is now a big boy on the continent. African Development Bank was definitely a primary player in the setup of that through equity participation. Afri-Re, Shelter Afrique, UBA, TCX, etc. Then from an indirect equity participation, we've also provided a lot of funds, private equity funds, etc., capital for their setup or for their round of financing. Trade finance. That's where I have my colleague step up and help me with this presentation. So Bernard, if you would. He's the specialist in trade finance, and if he's in the room, I would not want to step in his territory. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Do we have other slides after this? No, I can just do a summary. Okay. Thank you, Richard. Is it still morning? Colleagues, I'll just go through this slides, basically, and then request you that if you have any other clarifications to make, then we can meet during the B2B meeting, where I can also assist you to ask questions. So generally, we have 4 instruments under the trade finance program. 2 of them are funded, and the other 2 are unfunded. So I'll start with the funded instruments. We have the line of credit, trade finance line of credit, which is funded. Basically, our products are some are wholesale. In the earlier presentations, you were told we don't have the capacity to stretch to the SMEs in each and every country. So what we do is we go through financial institutions. So the trade finance line of credit is basically a loan, a trade loan, which is extended to the SMEs and local corporates, but through financial institutions for on lending to specifically trade finance clients who are involved in import and export activities. The tenor of this instrument is 3.5 years, and the major currencies are the euro and the US dollar, because you'll agree with me, most of the trade finance transactions are foreign currency based. You have to go through the eligibility criteria, what was said earlier. We have to look at your financials. We have to do a due diligence so that we ensure that you qualify. We have also other tier arrangements on this TFLOC. That is the AFAWA technical assistance that comes with this trade finance line of credit, where we insist that maybe 20% of what we give you should go towards women-owned business. But you'll ask us, if we don't have women in our portfolio, how do we go about it? That is the importance of the technical assistance to assist the financial institution we are dealing with, create some capacity through trainings and marketing of products related to women. The second funded facility is more specific for corporates. This is what we call the structured finance facility, which is meant to assist aggregators and corporates who are in the business of exporting agricultural commodities outside Africa. But currently now we have the regional trade where Rwanda is trading with Uganda, is trading with the East African partners, and also outside the country. So this one specifically is to support through providing a 2-year loan to support the aggregator assemble or buy the commodities from, it might be coffee or tea, from the farmers so that they can export it out. Alternatively, we have corporates which plant, harvest, and export. So basically that one is to support the aggregators and corporates in the agricultural field. Then the other remaining two products are unfunded. We have the risk participation agreement, which is basically for confirming banks. Because of the appetite, most suppliers outside there, when you're doing importations, have on the African continent, they don't trust us. They don't trust I&M that even if we do a letter of credit, they will be in a position to pay. So because of that reduced appetite, we come in to join with international and regional confirming banks to take part of that risk, to share the risk on 50-50% basis, to assist them do more business in Kenya by, I'm a Kenyan, sorry. So to do more business in Africa by confirming trade transactions originated from issuing banks in Africa. Then I said this international and regional banks. We have regional banks who also do confirmations. The likes of Absa Bank and other DFIs, Afrexim, Trade Development Bank. So we do assist them. And if you are a commercial bank in Rwanda with roots in the region and you feel you can go into confirmation of letters of credit, please talk to us. We'll work with you. Then the last unfunded product is our newly introduced product, which is the transaction guarantee. What happened is that as we got along with the confirming banks, international and regional, we noticed that we left everything to them to decide which bank, issuing bank, to deal with, looking at the appetite for that bank. So most of the issuing banks in Africa were left out on this support. So we came up with the transaction guarantee, where we can now approach individual issuing banks in Africa and work with them. So basically the transaction guarantee is where African Development Bank takes 100% cover, payment, risk cover on issuing banks, where we give a guarantee to the confirming bank and tell them, look here, in case I&M, I'm using I&M, I'm not saying you will default. In case I&M will not pay you on this letter of credit issued to you and required confirmation, then use our guarantee, we'll come in and pay you. So it's beneficial to the issuing banks because most confirming banks, especially international banks, normally ask for cash cover to add confirmation to this import transactions. But with our guarantee, you won't have that pressure to provide 100% cash cover just lying somewhere in an Nostro account, maybe in Europe or Asia, just to cover an import transaction. So I'll stop there, and if you have any other clarifications or anything to ask, then let's meet after this during the B2B meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. I think you definitely helped me out. So I think this brings us to the end of our financial products presentation. However, we have enough time for a Q&A, which will cover all the sectors or all what we've been presented this morning, starting from Walter's CSP, the country strategy paper, to El Haj presenting the private sector policy document, is that right? And then to the financial products presentation. We also have our country manager here to provide context into any question that you would have related to the country and what we're doing out here. We also have our director of trade and industries to provide context into what we are doing within the trade and industrialization space. We have my colleagues out here, Emeka is out here to provide context on infrastructure, is that right? Then we have Diane and then Charles, who would cover agri-finance. Then we have Bernard, who just walked off, who would also cover trade finance. So we definitely have the full spectrum, in my opinion, with the exception of energy. But if there are energy-related questions which we cannot answer in this room, we'll take your questions, and then we would get back to you with various answers. So I think let's make this session very interactive. We are here for you. We are here to understand your needs. We are here to get a better understanding of what we need to do to facilitate private sector-led investments in Rwanda. And I think Walter had mentioned it very clearly that he wants to see a final slide the next time that we come here, which would show various private sector interventions which have been facilitated by the African Development Bank. Thank you.
Urakoze. Munyemerere mumfashe dushimire presenters badukoreye ibiganiro neza cyane. Baratwigishije. Thank you presenters for a good and detailed presentation. I think the audience has got enough information more than they needed. Ngira ngo tumaze umwanya munini turimo kumva aba bagabo kandi batwigishije byinshi. Ubu tugiye kujya muri session kuba bafite ibibazo kugira ngo tubabaze musobanukirwe kurushaho. Ariko mbere yuko mubaza, mbere yuko tubaha mikoro mukabaza, nagira ngo nanjye mbabazeho gatoya, biraza kudufasha. Imwe mu impamvu ino nama yabaye ni ukugira ngo bifashe na bank namwe ndetse confusion iri hagati aho abantu bitana ba mwana, ariko bank ikeneye kugira ibyo yumva kugira ngo niba hari bitagenda ishobore kuba yakosora. Ndashaka kubaza muri mwebwe aya makuru yose tubonye amakuru menshi cyane, niba hari amakuru mwari musanzwe muzi ku bijyanye n'izi products zabo. Mr. Walter yatweretse hari igihe ageze gushyiraho map, atwereka u Rwanda rwose, agenda atwereka projet zitandukanye bagiye bafinansa, ariko byagaragaye yuko bafinansaga kuri kote ya leta. Ukibaza ngo mbese byaba private sector itarizi yuko hariyo iyo window ya private sector, cyangwa mwari mubizi ariko dusubiye kuri criteria batweretse, criteria zaba zirimo zirabagonga. Aho turagira ngo tuze kubiganiraho nabyo mutanga amakuru niba hari ikibazo cya awareness, niba private sector itazi izo products za bank, African Bank, ubwo no kuvuga ngo ni uruhare rwa bank nayo kureba ku bijyanye na awareness yakongeramo imbaraga kugira ngo abantu bamenye products zabo. Ariko ibyo nige nibajije, ariko ngira ngo tugenda dusubiraho aho bitagenda kugira ngo buri ruhande ruze kureba ibyo rwakosora. Ariko the floor is yours. Ndagira ngo abafite ibibazo ndi kumwe na bagenzi banjye hano badufashe gutanga mikoro. Abashaka kubaza mu Kinyarwanda babe comfortable babaze mu Kinyarwanda, and those who want to ask in English, go ahead and ask your questions. Thank you.
Good morning.
Hi.
My name is Donald Kabanda. I'm from the baby sector, which is called e-mobility. It's a sector that, of course, a sector that has been developing in Western countries, but in Africa, it's still a baby. It's a sector that is capital intensive. It requires a lot of capital. If I have time to go into numbers and show you how much batteries that are required to offset the petrol that is being imported, that is not even refined in Africa. However much the raw materials for the petrol or fuel is coming from Africa, but the process is not being taken in Africa. So the battery technologies is still new. It requires a lot of research and development, and this is not going to be undertaken by the private sector only, but supposed to be supported by the banks and the governments. So I would like to, I'm asking this question that cross-cuts the three sectors, the three important parts, the climate financing that requires green funds, the transport, and most importantly, the infrastructure for these projects to be implemented. Thank you.
Ndagira ngo dufate ibibazo bigera kuri 5 mbere yuko abasubiza basubiza, hanyuma niba mara gusubiza turaza kongera dufate round nanone ibibazo 5. We are going to take 5 questions at a go, then after we shall see if we will have another round for the questions. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alice Murichinga. I'm the country director of BPN Business Professionals Network. We work with dynamic SMEs, who are not looking at subsistence entrepreneurship, but who are really looking at making a difference. And my dear friend has just put me on the spot. I had not intended to speak, but I take this opportunity, first of all, to appreciate this seminar, to appreciate the African Development Bank and the Private Sector Federation for establishing this conversation, which I see not only as a conversation, really, but as a bridge so that collaboration can start and that together we can make a difference here in Rwanda. And I really commend the target of the map we have seen. It's a map that is challenging us as a private sector to think of how can we duplicate what has been done on the part of the public side, that we can do it in the private sector. And so it's a beautiful challenge that we have all of us here together. And my question would go more on how SMEs can benefit. Those many SMEs that I represent, I understand that the idea is not that each and everyone accesses the AFDB individually, but more packaged and collaborative approaches. So is it the idea that to find financial institutions that can bridge? So what would be the best takeaway of this session in terms of supporting SMEs? What would be the best case scenario? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Francine Munyaneza. I'm the founder and the CEO of Munyaxeco, a company working in solar energy. And I just want to complete what Don mentioned and Alice mentioned. We talk about climate finance. I came a little bit late, so maybe you talk about it, but for me, I would really like to know what you do more specifically for climate finance, for green finance, and also for blended finance. And this is to really complete what Don said. Another point also, when Alice mentions SMEs, She mentioned mini SMEs, but also there is bigger SMEs. And we can see also when there are support of local banks. For me, I feel, and this is, I think, a general feeling, that when there are support to local banks, it doesn't really benefit to companies. We can see that local banks are doing a lot of money, but we really feel that they are very cold. In French, we say frileux. I don't know how you say that in good English, but they are really frilous. They are really risk adverse, and maybe there are many reasons for that, but definitely SMEs and corporates might suffer from that. So how, and to complete the question of Alice, how to make the funds more available to more companies, to more people, how to make the local bank or local institutions more accommodate private sector here in our country, because we all know that this is part of the development of our countries. And talking about climate change, very important issue. We have seen that in our country very recently, so we really, really need to support companies like us, and others, of course, definitely, but to support us to do more, because we can do more. We have a lot of ideas. And last but not least, we are facing the competition of other international, Westerns or Chinese or Indian company. How to also favorize and motivate, incite local content. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Fred. I'm the Managing Director of Rail Contractors. The question you asked, I didn't get the name. I think it's about us coming here and try to agree whether we are ignorant or not about the availability of these facilities the colleagues are trying to explain to us. I want to say something around this. When the presentation was running, I realized that the minimum for ADB is $10 million. Do we really need to get a definition of what SMEs are, at least for the people in this room? Probably that might be the reason why it might not talk to some of us. I think $10 million is not small for most of the companies that operate in our private sector. That might be one reason why we might not converge, at least. Now, at least for my case, I think I'm a bit beyond the 10 million. But yes, we do use facilities like the line of credit that was explained in trade finance. But again, I had some sort of a disclaimer from the gentleman that presented that area saying that because we don't have our going into the SMEs, so we go through the local banks or the financial institutions. We found ourselves again limited there because we think that our single obligors in these local banks, we are the ceilings. So I don't know how, for example, today, if you kept using I&M, let me continue that example. Brother is close to me here. If my single obligor is at the top and I need these alternative lines, how do I go past this hurdle? Because I'll find myself limited. I can't go to I&M now. But when I come here for alternatives, you're referring me back to I&M. So I think for me, somebody should help me around there. If we are looking out these alternatives and we have to go to the mainstream institutions, we again find ourselves limited. So I think my takeaway will be around that area, how to maneuver that. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Kanyonya. I'm from the textile sector. pretty much mine is like what you just said. When we talk about the SMEs, and actually refers to the banks, whenever you go to the commercial banks, nobody is going to talk about the products of African Development Bank. And if they are there, we don't know. And we need to hear today, which banks in Rwanda you have agreements with, and how can you approach them to know that they have those facilities. Because more often when you go there, they will tell you, we have the money, we are liquid, and this is what we can sell. So we need to know which banks you have agreement with, what approaches, and where need to be, what can the local branch of African Development Bank help us to approach and access those financing. Thanks.
Murakoze, thank you so much. Reka dufashe ibyo bibazo uko ari bitanu, nyuma nibamara gusubiza abaza kuba kandi bafite ibibazo, turaza gukomeza dufata ibindi bibazo, ndabona tugifite umwanya. Thank you so much, presenters. I think we can take over the questions, but the first question is going to be answered by Mrs. Aisa. The question from Kawanda. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you for your interest and the questions. Maybe for your information on the e-mobility, as we speak, the government and the bank is going to fund next year, a project that we called the Kigali Urban Transport Improvement Projects. This is the sovereign and public side of the projects. On the infrastructure, we are currently doing the feasibility studies. The infrastructure itself would be designed next year, and the following years, the e-mobility aspect with the private sector will go. But as we are engaging with some commercial banks and other entities to see what should be the vehicle to get that funding for the e-buses, for instance, and the charging stations. We approach Banque de Développement du Rwanda to see if, because coming back to your question, the 10 million ticket might be maybe too much for the bus companies, right? So we are looking for an entity that can take the money and lease to those companies. So it's really something that is nascent, you're right, in the country, but we have engaged, and it's part of the pipeline that we have for Rwanda 2022 to 2025. So yes, if I can also take advantage of having the mic on the climate change, maybe Richard, I will put you on the spot, I don't know, but on the public window of climate change, we have even identified this Kuti project has a project that we can leverage some climate finance in addition to the 100 million that I mentioned. But on the private sector, I don't know how the mobilization, but I'm sure that colleagues here in the room will be able to respond to your, and to clarify. Which bank are receiving our lines of credit? Banque de Développement du Rwanda. We had the lines of credit in the past, or is maybe closing very soon with BK. Then we are in negotiation with Cogebank, right? But within one of the financing window or project that we have, the AFAWA, that I think one of my colleagues mentioned, Rwanda received, in terms of guarantee, $8 million. And it's Access Bank, Equity Bank, and EcoBank, I think, who received that money to be able to unlend to SMEs, women-led SMEs. Thank you.
just add just a few to some of these questions that Isa, I think, has already addressed. But in the issue of e-mobility beyond Rwanda, because I think your question is what the bank is also doing, we in the bank actually see the future of electric cars, like as Africa playing a key role in that. You know, all the lithium, iron, you know, cobalt, nickel, these are all minerals that are predominantly available in Africa. You know, the market is expected to reach maybe about 7 trillion by 2030 for EMBs, and then almost by $46 trillion, this is trillion, not billion, by 2050. So it's a huge market. So we have a very clear strategy to do this, to support in countries who are working with our partners, Africa Finance Corporation, Afrexim Bank, Africa 50, Development Bank of South Africa, to actually come up with a comprehensive strategy for EMVs, how to really develop this. We're already talking to countries, in DRC, for example, Nigeria. I know we're already looking at projects there, and Isa has talked about the projects and what we're trying to do here in Kigali. For you specifically, if you have a project that you have in mind, if you're in that space, we'll be happy to look and discuss that project during the bilateral discussion and see how we can support you, like Isa has stated. So that's it. And on climate change, I think, again, Isa has addressed it in the bank. We are really big on that. We have a commitment that we made to the shareholders that I think by 2030, I think about 80% of our projects, of everything that we do in the bank will be climate resilient and in line with, you know, Paris Agreement and all of those, you know, global agreements to take care of climate-related issues. It's embedded in every project that we do, whether it's industrialization, whether it's in energy, whether it's in agriculture. You know, there is a climate green component in all of that. With energy in particular, you know, we're moving away from fossil fuels. One of the projects, I don't know whether you've heard, is called the Desert to Power Initiative that the African Development Bank is doing. This is a huge project, about $20 billion, to actually bring power to about 250 million people. This will be the largest solar zone on the planet, covering 11 countries in the Sahel region. It's called the Desert to Power, and you can Google it. There's a lot of information in there. So this is just one specific project that we're doing, you know, to address that from an energy perspective. But again, in agri, in manufacturing, in mining, everything there is an embedded component for green component and involvement, and also for climate resilience. Thank you. We'll be happy to discuss more and link you up with the energy people to give you more information. Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you for your questions. Let me try to address the question on the 10 million. Look, the $10 million limit is not cast in stone. It's not cast in a policy document, but then it goes to, you know, enforce the bank's way of doing business in terms of selectivity and then transformational projects. We should not forget that we are a development finance institution, and we should not crowd out commercial banks. So in every project that we undertake, we ensure that, you know, there's some level of financial additionality. Why should we be involved if the commercial space can easily step up and then do these projects? However, that's not to say that we do not do projects which are below 10 million. We definitely do projects that are below 10 million. For as long as they have huge developmental impacts. And let's step back for a moment and just look at also the overall transaction costs to the private sector entity in a very small project that would be financed by the African Development Bank. You know, there are various, you know, requirements, in terms of documentation, in terms of aligning the project to different sort of needs and directions and scope of the African Development Bank, including yourselves. So I think the 10 million, we should not just look at it from a 10 million perspective. If you have a project, please share with us. And it's below 10 million, please share with us. We would review the project and would make recommendations around it. I want to also speak to the single obligor limits that you spoke to. We see that a lot in projects, and I think that's in various transactions, and I believe that's where our guarantees come into play. So when you have a single obligor limit with a particular institution, a particular commercial institution, you can just approach the African Development Bank, who will definitely be able to wrap the projects with our guarantee instrument, our partial credit guarantee instrument. What it does is that it takes the risk capital allocation from the commercial bank's perspective. It completely lowers it down from a single obligor perspective for us to be able, or for the commercial bank to be able to engage with you. So don't forget that by having the PCG behind your project, it basically takes off some of the risk capital allocation that the bank would have allocated to your project on a single, quote unquote, basis. So we can definitely use that. An alternative structure is also for us to share the risk with the commercial bank. So we can do a risk sharing facility with the commercial bank, where instead of the commercial bank taking 100% of the credit obligations, we agree with the commercial bank to take maybe 70%, they take up 30%. What it means is that your single obligor limit that you've already got into, there's enough gap for the commercial bank to be able to execute on your behalf. Then there was a question on how can SMEs benefit from our interventions. Definitely our interventions for SME, direct SME, a lot of the SME support sometimes would go through letters of lines of credit, where we provide financing for commercial banks for them to execute on that. Through our equity investments too, where we provide investments into private equity funds, they are able also to provide a level of investments to yourselves. An alternative way that we look at providing support to SMEs is through portfolio guarantees. So we could do a portfolio guarantee structure with a commercial bank in Rwanda, where we would have the commercial bank originate assets into a portfolio. So package a batch of SME projects. We'll agree with the commercial bank under certain eligibility criteria. They would be able to package a whole batch of SME into that portfolio, and then we would provide a portfolio guarantee in that particular context. So that's definitely another way that we provide support to the SME sector. Then there was another question on what is the bank doing in blended finance? And I think, and I'm going to speak from the agri perspective. And even in the energy space, we have the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, which provides concessional financing to blend with market-related, to go along with market-related financing to come out into a sort of blended finance structure. Within the agri-financing space, we have the agri-catalytic financing mechanism. It's a 100 million facility which provides concessional level financing into SMEs in particular. So these sort of instruments or initiatives definitely go alongside a lot of the market-based financing that we do to be able to provide blended financing structures into various projects. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I will just add a few things. So on the local banks that we are working with, Isa already talked about Development Bank of Rwanda that we have an active line with. We had worked in the past with Bank of Kigali, with Access Bank, but these have been repaid. And so I don't know if Development Bank of Rwanda is here. They will, if they are here, they can talk about how our funds are on lend to SMEs. On the question on sometimes funds given to banks are not going to SMEs, or some of them they don't see it. What we can assure you is that whenever we give financing to a bank, we agree with them on the parameters, right? So it's not just we give you the money, you do whatever you want to do, because there is, you need to report to us on the utilization of the funds. So if we agree that 20% or 50% need to be go to SMEs, then you need to report that to us at the end of the day. So it's not just giving them. And also, as I mentioned, often we give them also technical assistance to help them structure themselves and better analyze the risk of SMEs and so on, right? So that's how we can do what we can do to ensure we reach SMEs. What can we do more? I think it's really is to work with more financial intermediaries in the market. So today we have one active and then another one under negotiation. So if we can do more facilities in Rwanda, then we can reach more SMEs, because we have many programs. I talked about the Africa SME program, right? This was accessed by Access Bank in the past, but that is repaid and it's no longer active, so we can do something more, right? We have the AFAWA that can do more. We have many other facilities where we can, or programs that we can work with the financial intermediaries, so you know, they can have. And one of the products that could work very well is these either trade finance programs or on the lines of credit programs for SMEs. Thank you.
I think they've covered everything. Maybe just to add one thing about the products which we have. My experience with this bank since joining it several years back is that it is like a forest. Many things are in there which even us working for the bank, we discover every day that the bank actually does this. So all you need to do is, if you have an idea, package it, bring it to the country office. We will go looking in the bank, and definitely, unless you want to manufacture arms, which is what I'm clear about, the bank doesn't fund. If you're not going to manufacture arms, anything, please package it, bring it to the bank. Our headquarter colleagues, those in Nairobi, all over the place, will share it with them. Definitely someone will be handling it. The bank is so flexible that the first project which I handled, and I believe we don't do that anymore, the first project which I was handling, as an economist joining the bank, I looked at the project and I said, how could the bank do this? But we did it. It was a project which was designed to give grants to commercial banks, and these commercial banks were to on-lend specifically to women enterprises. But the commercial banks were made aware that if those women default, AFDB will repay the loans. I said, how do you do that up front? I mean, they will all default. Of course, 50% of them defaulted. The bank repaid the loans. But that's how flexible we can get, but I don't think we do that anymore. What I want to say is that we normally package products with clients, which means even though we talk about 10 million, already Richard has told you we can calm down. We sit down, package it with you, we agree terms. We sit with the commercial bank. If it is going to be a line of credit, somebody said, the commercial banks, you go to I&M, the rates are so high. We sit with them and we agree the lending terms on which they will lend to you, which might not necessarily, I think I'm correct on this, be the commercial rates to which they lend to everyone else. So come with the idea, bring it to the country office, we will process it through the relevant private sector colleagues, any sector except manufacturing arms. I think that is what the one I'm clear about, the bank does not fund. Thank you.
I think this has been covered, but we also invest in private equity funds, and many of them are based in Nairobi. They cover East Africa, and they're always looking for SMEs, and they're not able to, just because they're not as big as we are, they're not able to cover many of these companies. So we have relationships with them, so if you want to, maybe reach out to us so that we can put you in touch, that would be great. And someone asked about climate finance. I think Richard talked about it. We have climate change funds in the bank, so if you reach out to us, we can put you in touch with those funds.
murakoze presenters amaze gusubiza ibibazo mwari mwabajije ariko turacyafite umwanya bumva bagifite ibibazo mwakomeza tugafata round ya kabiri murakoze.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Cedric Ruchaha. I come from Kasorox Capital. We are an investment firm based in Rwanda. Mostly, we represent about 30 development finance institutions. Some of our partners are in the US and others are across Europe. So, number one, I want to thank the FDB team for the seminar. So, Kasorox mainly we usually work in moats, bidding, which means funds with leverage over the markets that they work in. So a perfect example here in the country would be MTN, which means they can increase their prices to drive profit but not lose customers. So most probably, so it's about strategic positioning the firms we work with. Madam Isa, I read about the strategic plan 2022-2026. Maybe if you could share as an investment firm the country diagnostic note of the 2021, we will get more clarity on the situation here going forward to help us in planning and capital allocation efficiency. So most importantly, we work with firms on the purpose of developing economies of scale to provide employment opportunities, but also to foster economic growth where they work. So most importantly, we're looking forward to create ripple effects upon the firms we work with, and hence this seminar, especially the fund that you mentioned, about the 240 million, we believe is going to create a ripple effect for Rwandan farms to grow and scale across the regional blocks that we trade in. Our farms see a silver lining in municipality in the distribution, also how our farms grow and expand across the regional blocks. We have EAC with about $100,000 per GDP per capita. Yeah. Okay, so mainly the question is about your capital allocation strategy, because we see that the fund you're going up on the minimum threshold of $10 million. So we think it's going to be used for us and investment farmers who see it's going to be used in leverage buyouts and more acquisition for our other farms, so they can really make big corporations that can get more capital and that grow more inter-regional blocks so they can boost their profit. So the other question is, how do you work with private equity firms in Rwanda? Because I think what everybody in the room mentioned is about how hard it is to get access to finance and the higher cost of finance across the country. So number one, the private equity firms, we think they provide risk sharing because they're acquiring the capital needed first. And so we want to know how is there any private equity firms you work with, or how can we access it if you are a private equity firm, you're in your private equity fund. So the third question is your skill development strategy in corporations that already has personnel to redevelop, because one of the few problems you mentioned in the strategic paper is about the problem in skills development. So we want to know what's your strategy to farms across the country. Thank you.
Ndifuza kubaza mu Kinyarwanda nibyo biza kunyorohera kuvuga icyo nkeneye kuvuga. Mu byo batubwiye burya umucuruzi ntabwo abura credit, ahubwo ikigorana cyane ni inyungu kuri credit zitangwa. Ntabwo nigeze numva rero batubwira credit zabo inyungu bazitangaho. Icyo ni kimwe. Ikindi nashaka kugira ngo mvuge cyangwa se mbaze ni igihe umucuruzi cyangwa se ikigo gifite umwenda muri banke kikaba gifite uwo mwenda kuri taux d'intérêt iri hejuru cyane, ese iyi banke africaine ishobora kugura iyo credit ikamuha kuri rate iri hasi? Nibyo nifuzaga kumenya. Murakoze.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick. I represent an investment group here in Rwanda, fairly new. I have a couple of questions. Number one is we are seeing a global trend shift in economic powers between the West and the BRICS in terms of utilization of the dollar. I just want to understand what the strategy of the bank is and what the effect will be in the long-term borrowing of the private sector. I appreciate the risk management products that you have, but eventually I believe it all goes back to the deposits that I'll easily guess are mostly USD, and what that means if I borrow long-term dollar and there is a shift, how am I protected? That's number one. Number two is the exclusivity list that I believe most banks follow the IFC. One gentleman talked about ammunition and the bank not financing that sector. I totally agree, but I just want to understand what the flexibility is. I'll easily say, yes, you don't finance ammunition, but let's look at the global funding and the government expenditures on the African continent that goes to ammunition. That easily tells us how much money we are losing as Africa. What is the flexibility for the bank? Number two, we are partly involved in agriculture. One of the biggest issues that we have in agriculture is value addition, transportation, and then the payment gap. For us to make more sense, most of our businesses are in export, but we face challenges in terms of certification, partly because we don't have any certification, which I don't think is right if we are providing most of the raw materials. What is the bank doing thus to facilitate? In terms of cargo transport, what's the bank doing in that regard? Last, I'm forgetting, but processes. You talk about 240-something million that you have. If you ask me, that's not too much for this country, honestly. The gentleman touched on the limits that you have, the tickets of $10 million, that partly being part of the issue. But if you ask me from my previous experiences, the biggest issue is going to be processes. I worked with a couple of projects that we co-financed with banks like you, Afrexim and the likes. One of the biggest issues is your processes and how inflexible they are. By the time I put in my application, easily 3 years down the road, I haven't received money. By the time you're giving me money to implement this project, it's totally irrelevant. What commitment are you giving us? I can guarantee you 240 million can easily be consumed from now to 31st December if your processes are right. Thank you.
Abandi muntu ufite ikibazo? Reka tube dusabe babe basubiza ibyo tumaze kumva, then uza kuba ariko n'amasaha ndabona.
Sorry a bit. There is a question that was asked in Kinyarwanda, which was more about whereby members need to learn more about the interest rate. What is really, the interest rate, to access the loan. The second was, is there any possibility to acquire an existing loan? And if yes, what are modalities and terms? Is the second one, okay, good. So those were the two questions, that were raised by the lady.
Do I? The last one?
So let me try to take the last question before it escapes. The participant had asked about where to see the interest rates of the bank. As I had indicated, the bank prices its loans over a reference rate. So we have, for the US dollar, the secured overnight financing rate plus a margin. I'll get to that point. What it means is that it's the margin that we determine based on the underlying credit fundamentals of the project. So the underlying credit fundamentals of the project would determine the underlying margin of the project. So the riskiness of that particular project determines the underlying margin. But if I'm to give you an exact rate, there is no one unique rate for private sector projects. Every project would be unique, based on the underlying risk fundamentals of that particular project. But if I'm to look at the overall book of the private sector, so these are, I'm taking an average, and this average would spread across very high risk projects to very low risk projects. Projects in countries which are rated high risk like Sudan, to projects in countries that are rated low risk like Botswana. So it's a spread across that. And if I'm look hypothetically at the book that we have, the maximum rate, or not the maximum, the average rate over our reference-based rate would be about 4.5% over a base rate. That's 450 basis points. That would be the average rate. And what I'm saying is that there could be projects in the portfolio which have rates as low as 2.5. There could be projects in the portfolio which has rates as high as 7%. So when you look at the average spread, you are looking at over a base rate of about 4.5%. Then there was a question on can we acquire existing loans? If I understood your question correctly, it means can we refinance your book? We definitely do not do refinancing. And that's encapsulated in the agreement establishing the African Development Bank. Refinancing, we definitely do not do. Because refinancing, what it means for us is definitely, you basically using your AAA rated rates, which allows us to go into the capital markets to do, to price competitively, to take out commercial financiers. So from a refinancing perspective, we definitely do not do refinancing. There was another question on, let me try to arrange myself. There was another question on the shift from, it's always in the news that the BRICS are trying to shift away from the US dollar into the Chinese renminbi. To be frank, the African Development Bank, our borrowing, we also borrow in Chinese renminbi and then swap into US dollars. we borrow US dollars and swap into euros. So we have a basket of currencies. We operate on what we call the unit of account. And the unit of account comprises the US dollar, the Chinese renminbi, the euro, the JPY. So the team in Treasury looks to see where there's cheap sources of funding. We can go into the kangaroo market, borrow in Australian dollars, and swap into US dollars. So the bank is always scouring for markets or capital markets that provide us very competitive rates based on our AAA rated rating, to be able to also extend funding in whichever currencies, the currencies that I had earlier mentioned, US dollar, JPY, the various local currencies, etc. So irrespective of the shift in the environment, for the African Development Bank as a AAA rated institution, we'll be able to take advantage of wherever there's cheap borrowing or cheap funding in the capital markets to ensure that our clients have the requisite financing that they need. There was a question on what if the shift happens and, your payments are now in Chinese renminbi. I had also mentioned earlier in my conversation or in my presentation that we have risk management products through the currency, cross-currency risk management products. We would be able to swap and get you the requisite currency that you need. So in terms of currency movements or the direction of your export markets changes and you need to reprofile your loan, from a currency perspective, we can definitely use our cross-currency swap to avail you the currency that you want. I think there was a question on the processing time. Well, we always say, and I think the processing time depends on you, depends on the client. For as long as some of the projects will come to the bank, which are definitely not ready. Readiness is a key factor for us to go to our board for approval. Readiness in the sense of having the requisite documentation. Do you have your 3-year financial audited accounts? Yes, I do have my 3-year financial accounts. Do you have your management accounts ready? Oh, my auditors are now working on it, or my team is working on it. We'll get it to you. And it doesn't come back to us in about 3 or 4 weeks. So that adds on time to our processing. Do you have your environmental studies already done? Oh, I need to do that. I need to engage with consultants to do that. We're looking for feasibility studies. It takes a while. So for as long as your project is ready from the context of having all the relevant information, which we would ask of you, I think we can definitely execute projects in very short time periods. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the extent that you spoke to. And the extent that you spoke to is normally dependent on how ready the project is from a client perspective, but not from a bank perspective. Because from a bank perspective, when the investment officers go into the system and program your projects, from today, if you give us all the documentation, we can easily tell you when your project would go to the board. Because we have systems in place which shows us when a project would be approved by Committee A, by the credit committee, by the country team, by the senior management committee through OPSCOM, till the time it gets to the board. So these are all programmed in our systems with definite dates. And obviously our dates do not extend to what is out there. It's mainly because of the lack of information that have some of our projects extend to that time frame. I have my colleagues also contribute to the other questions that I might have missed. On the average time for processing a transaction, I would say between 4 to 6 months. From inception all the way to board approval and then to disbursement. So you'd think it takes 4 to 6 months, might be a long time, but imagine you're a new client that's now working with the bank. We get to know you, we do our credit assessment, you provide the requisite information, you provide your environmental impact studies, and sometimes where your project has very key environmental impacts, being a development financial institution, we need to we need to disclose for a given period of time. If your project is categorized as category 1, which involves resettlement, which involves a lot of heavy, environment impact type activities, this has to be disclosed to the community. This has to be disclosed to civil societies. And it has a time frame. So if you are able to have all those packaged earlier for us, disclosures come through, so we don't necessarily have to take that length of time to be able to get to our board for approval. Thank you.
I'll just add that one of the things that delay project is this environmental and social assessment, because it has to be up to the standards, right? So if your assessment is not up to the standard, then you need to do it very well. And as he mentioned, the disclosure need to be given. So as long as the information and all your studies and documentation is in place, then we can process things quickly. I just want to come back on interest rate, okay? So for us, we will be always cheaper than commercial bank in terms of hard currency. But remember, many things is hard currency, right? So if it's local currency, then our rate can be high, but not, I don't think, higher than commercial banks, given we are still a AAA rated institution. So the issue is not about the interest rate, right? It's about the other things for accessing our funding, right? The interest rate is not a problem. We are very competitive in terms of interest rate. There was the question about the arm manufacturing. Can we be flexible? You know, sometimes even our president talk about this issue that, you know, given the terrorism and the fact that many countries are spending a lot of money on security, maybe we should deal with this. But on the other hand, we cannot do everything, right? We need to be focused. We need to be selective. We cannot do everything. So at the moment, our policies is that we don't do this, then we don't do it, period, right? There is no flexibility in that, because we cannot deal with all the problems. There are many developmental issues in Africa, then we need to choose the one where we understand first, right? And where we can have impact. The other question I want to address is on the PE funds that can, that you can access. You can ask us afterward. I have some of the PE funds that already invested in Rwanda and some that cover here. And as my colleagues Emeka also said, we have the name, so we can provide you with this information of PE funds in the region covering Rwanda. Thanks.
Let me just add one other thing that my colleague just mentioned in terms of the interest rates. What we're saying is that we do not crowd out commercial players. So for short-term facilities which can easily be provided by commercial banks, we would not deal in the short-term sort of space. But when it comes to long-term financing, we are very competitive in that particular space. Financing that moves from 5 to 15 years. We are very competitive in that financial space. Then my colleague also touched on the issue of ammunition, and it's very clear. I mean, within our exclusion list, together with other sister institutions, we definitely would not finance ammunition. However, you have spoken to a good point which states that, look, a lot of the countries, especially in the Sahel, Burkina, Mali, Niger, are financing a lot of their budget components goes into what? Security issues. So what is the African Development Bank doing in that? I know there's an ongoing paper in terms of how do we structure an instrument that would help provide a security-linked instrument. It should not necessarily be financing ammunition, but security-linked instrument, because security in that particular context goes along with displacement of people. So there are a lot of things that happens within that particular space. There's displacement of the population. There's impact on migration, where people would migrate from Burkina into northern Ghana. It places a lot of pressure on the Ghanaian budget. So we are designing a product which will take care of security-related issues, not necessarily financing ammunition. Ammunition finance within the security context is just one component. But there are other components within that security infrastructure that the bank can assist.
Yeah, I think just to add briefly, I'm glad my colleague read the Country Diagnostic Note 2021. I'm very pleased with that. These were introduced in 2018, so every country, before you prepare a country strategy paper, you have to do a Country Diagnostic Note, which basically helps us to identify the problems, the challenges, and the sectors where we need to engage. And then we use that as a dialogue tool with the governments, private sector, and everyone else, and then finally we agree what we do. It's a living document, as I said in my presentation. Currently, we are working on a growth model, which will be updating the Country Diagnostic Note, which will help us to redefine our second half of the CSP, which we'll be working on from the end of this year, and also prepare the next country strategy paper. There was something about skills development. We agree. I think this is something development partners, we've been talking with the government. It's an area which even the census identified needs a lot of work. As you saw in my presentation, we are engaging there, but minimally. I think we only have 2 projects right now. Maybe a third one is the Coding Academy, which is a small thing. Within the development partner group, we have Division of Labor, what we call Division of Labor. I believe Gerald is in the room now. Maybe if we will be happy to speak briefly during the closing, he can maybe speak to that. But I think we have the World Bank and other players leading on that, but we have small projects addressing that. I think that is what I wanted to add. Somebody talked about cargo transportation, certification, etc. I think when we go to the B2B, and I would encourage, if not all of us, please let's go to the B2B, and this B2B will just be the beginning. After that, then we can have contacts developed, and then through the country office, we can develop deeper linkages, and then we continue the dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, there's something that was not comprehensively addressed. I think probably is not, maybe not to the expectation of the person who asked the question. There was a question on how FDB works with PEs. And I think the question might have been misunderstood to some extent. Now, here is the thing. As the FDB, I think as a general principle, we do understand that the development needs of Africa as a continent is far bigger than the capacity of any single one institution to actually fully satisfy. And because of that, I think over the years, the bank has tried to, as much as possible, invest in catalyzing other financial institutions and other financial players to come on the continent and, provide additional funding, especially where certain expertise are required and flexibilities that the bank cannot actually itself provide. And because of that, over the years, the bank has invested very heavily in PEs. And the understanding is that the PEs are more specialized, they're more focused and nimble, and they can go into some spaces which we cannot go into, especially the spaces we have been talking about, which is like the SME space. So we have invested in a lot of PEs, but we invest as limited partners. We bring in some small amount of investment as part of the overall fundraising of the PEs to catalyze investment from other players outside the continent, to put funds which are then available for investing in different sectors and in different countries. So yes, to answer your question directly, we do finance PEs. However, as it stands now, the bank is currently very heavily invested in PEs, so we are slowing down a little bit on that part, except in situations where there are some special additionalities and development outcomes that can be exhibited through the private equity funds. Then there we may invest funds. Otherwise, one of the roles of the bank also is to send strong signals to the market by providing demonstration effect by investing in a certain area such that other players can also put in money. Now, we believe very strongly the PE market in Africa is very well developed, but thanks to the effort of AFDB that has anchored that market for a very long time. I think now it's about time for ADB to slow down a bit so that other people who have picked interest in that field can also put in a bit of investment. But otherwise, we still do invest, but on a selective basis now. Thank you.
Murakoze. Thank you, panelists. Audience, join me to thank these panelists for the interactive session they have given us. Thank you. Before I hand over to Mr. Walter, my colleague, Mr. Walter, ndagira ngo nkore mbahe amatangazo mbere yuko dusoza, twinjiye mu cyiciro cyo gusoza, ariko mbere yuko dusoza ndagira ngo mbahe amatangazo cyangwa mbahe clarification n'ibigiye gukurikira. Naye nababwiye ko after lunch tuza kuba dufite B2B meetings, aho muri buze guhura na bano these experts from the bank. Ushaka araza kugenda wenyine mukaganira, abashaka bari muri sector imwe baraza kujyana babishatse, ariko afternoon yose nibyo baza kuba barimo barakora. Rero twashize hari sectors zitandukanye ziraza kuba zirimo gukorera ahantu hatandukanye, tugiye kubabwira kugira ngo nituva kuri lunch buri imwe bitewe na sector arimo aze kujoininga these experts from the bank muganire. Abantu bo muri industry and service muraza kuza hano, muragaruka ahangaha turi niho muri bukorere, muraza kuba mufacilitatingwa na umukozi umwe muri bank witwa Emeka Christophe. Can you put your hands up so that people can see you? Abo muri industry and service muraza kugaruka hano kugira ngo muze guhura n'uwo muntu. Then abo muri financial products cyangwa financial instrument muraza kujya usubiye inyuma mbere ho gatoya yuko winjira ahangaha, hari rooms ziri hepfo. Muraza kubona ku muryango biba byanditseho, muraza kujya muri AD5 AD5 abo muri financial products kugira ngo muze guhura na expert witwa Bernard Mukutsi. Can you put hands up? Mukutsi niwe muza guhura kugira ngo muganire. Then abo muri agriculture and agro industry muraza kuba muri AD6 nanone ni hepfo mbere yuko winjira hano. Muraza gufacilitatingwa n'abantu babiri, Diane Lee na Charles. Yes, abo nibo muza kuba muri kumwe. Then energy cyangwa infrastructure muraza kuba muri AD4. Ibyo byuma mvuga birakurikiranye, muraza kubona bigiye byanditseho uko mbivuze, birakurikiranye hepfo mbere yuko uzamuka hano. Muraza kuba muri mwo gufacilitatingwa na Alhaji Mamadou, uwo mwabonye wakomeje wari uri kuri pano wadukoreye presentation kugira ngo mwamumenyereye. So ibibazo byinshi mutabajije hano cyangwa ibyo umuntu yibaza cyangwa details zindi akeneye, mwaza kwingaginga aba ba experts mukaganira ndetse mugahana na contacts kugira ngo mukomeze gukorana. Ikindi hari forms twabohereje cyangwa babohereje muri bank ndetse na PSF. babasabaga ko mwuzuza, hari abatari bazigarura. Izo forms zirakenewe kuko nizo zitanga amakuru nyayo ku bari interested gukorana na bank. Turagira ngo tubamare impungenge ko abantu benshi bajya, hari igihe wibaza ngo mbese iyo form irajyaho iraccessingwa nande, ariko nkuko mumenyereye gukorana n'amabanki, ni information biri confidential, ni abakozi ba bank, ni amakuru ya banki, nta wundi muntu areba. Rero ku bari interested gukorana na banki, mwasubiza izo forms kugira ngo bifashe abakozi ba banki kugira ibyo bakora. Mbere ye nanone yuko mpanding over to Mr. Walter, nyuma nitumara guclosinga turaza gufata group photo please, ntihagire abaza gusohoka tudafashe group photo. Turaza kuyifatira hangaha mbere yuko tu breaking off tujya kuri lunch yacu turaza kuyifatira muri restaurant. Turasubira gutya, dufite team ya protocol iraza kubereka restaurant turi buze kujyamo. Please, twabateguriye lunch, mwateguriwe lunch, ntihaza kugenda muze kugenda mudafashe lunch yanyu. Again, nanone kuko tutaza kongera gushobora guhurira hamwe turi twese, nyuma ya B2Bs haraza kubaho cocktail. Please, cocktail yateguwe ni yanyu, haracyari amasaha ngira ngo kugira ngo abantu baze kumingolinga, abantu baze gusabana, abantu baze kuganira. Ibyo byose biraza kubera kuri cocktail, kuko nyuma ya hangaha twahoze twicaye muri salle ducecetse turimo kumviriza ibyo batwigisha. Nyuma yaha muraza kujya muri groups zitandukanye, ariko cocktail iraza kudushyira hamwe kugira ngo dushobore kuganira, abatari baherukanye bashobore kongera kuvugana. Murakoze, ndabashimiye kuri session nayoboye. Mwakoze kuba mwaduteze amatwi kandi mwagize ubwitonzi bwinshi. Ndatekereza yuko ino session itugirira akamaro twese. Mu izina ry'abari bampaye izi nshingano ndabashimiye cyane, tuzongera guhura. Murakoze.
Thank you, Betty. I believe when we do this with you in 2026, I'll do exactly what you are doing. So can I ask Faustin and Isa, please, we started from the top there, if you can move to the table so that we do the closing, please. As they do that, I think I just wanted to acknowledge Minekofin is not represented by Gerald, but by Lillian. Lillian, please. If you want to say something, we can give you a microphone. If you don't want to say something, it's fine. Do you want to say something? No. Do we have RDB in the room? RDB maybe is left, but I believe Minecom is still there. Do you want to say something? We can give you a microphone. You can say something? Yes, please. Give me a microphone. I think it is important that we acknowledge this is a tripartite thing between the bank, the private sector, and the government.
Yeah, thank you. What I could say on behalf of Minicom, or Ministry of Trade and Industry, is to thank the ADB for the continued efforts it's doing in developing our country. And as a minister in charge of trade and industry, I could call upon the private sector to use this opportunity and, if possible, get the funding. And maybe one thing you don't mention, they mentioned that 10 million thing. It's a big one for the businesses in Rwanda. So, as I have seen with other development partners, there's where they say that you can make a conglomerate, or you come together as firms or industries, such that you can access that facility. So maybe in the B2B, you have to mention maybe about that, how companies in Rwanda can come together and make that synergy for them to be able to access the $10 million which is available by the bank. So I thank you, and let's use this opportunity to develop our country and our businesses. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that assurance. So we also have RDB board member who can speak. Please, if you can bring the microphone. Moses.
Yes, this time in the name of RDB, I'm an RDB board member, and I've already shared our appreciation for this event, and I'm happy to take this crucial information that we have shared today and the takeaways back to RDB. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think then we will head to the closing ceremony. As the colleague said there, please let's go to the B2B, start the dialogue there. But best business deals are normally done on the golf courses. And our golf course today is the 5 to 8, to 6, what they call cocktail. For me, that's a golf course. So let's head there also to see how we can dialogue even more deeply and then get this thing going. So I know once they make their statements, we'll just close it because we have been told where to go for lunch and where we are going for B2B. I just want to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from the bank who have worked so hard to organize this. I think you've seen them moving around. They already introduced themselves. And also my colleagues who came from Nairobi, from Abidjan, to come and facilitate this. And my colleague, Betty, with whom I think we've done this job today. But last but not least, to PSF management for organizing all this, but more to you members for coming to start this dialogue. I believe, as somebody said, that 240 is too little. Please take it up. If by the end of July you have taken it up, the bank is flexible. We have our director here. We have actually two directors here. The bank is flexible. There are many windows which can still be pulled on to add to. I think Minekofe knows that every 3 years we tell them we have this much for you, but somewhere in the middle, the country manager comes back to tell them, look, we can also add this on top if you have absorbed what we already gave you. So thank you so much. We will start, if you can give the microphone to the country manager, and then we'll have first in closing, and then we wind up. Thank you so much, Isa.
Thank you. Actually, you have done the closing remarks, so I have very little to add other than saying a big thank you. I may maybe do it in French. We had Kenya, Rwanda, we had English, maybe, a bit of French. No, I won't do that. Some of us here are purely Anglophone, English speaking. So I think as a bank staff, really, myself, I learned so much. I can only imagine for you in the room, this is for you the first time that either you're hearing from the bank or you learn that the bank does private sector financing, because we are known, as I said earlier, for public sector financing. Just for any information, I don't think that anybody mentioned that the Kigali bulk water, which is a PPP in the water sector, has been financed by the bank with 20 million to Metito and public financing to the government. We also have financed the Kivu Watt for 21 million. And I'm telling myself, if I was not around, I think many of us were not around, but if we were able to do that a few years ago, why not now that we have a bigger envelope, right, for private sector window? Really, I think what is missing is we need to be intentional. This is the first seminar of this kind that we're having. I really hope that we'll have a more engagement, because this is not how we can know each other better. Don't shy away of engaging. I'm quite determined and a bit pushy sometimes. If your requests, your demands, your questions come to the country program, I can assure you that it will go to the right people within the bank so that you can start engaging. We can be on the background to make sure that things are happening. We don't need to, because the expertise is elsewhere. But my role and the role of the team here is really to make sure that we can see a bigger footprint of private sector beyond the 12%, right? I think that's, we cannot explain to anybody here in this country that we are having minimum 150 million this year, 242 million that goes back when needs are here, and when the government has decided and clearly stipulated that want a private sector-led growth. So really, we want to be more intentional, to communicate more, and so this is what I can commit the bank today. Really a big, big thank you to the management and to PSF in general. You have done an incredible work in bringing all these stakeholders that we didn't know, actually, personally. So I know Alice, but I meet Alice in different spheres. So yes, I'm so pleased and, almost emotional to see all of you here. And then, merci beaucoup à tout le monde. On est vraiment très, très content de vous avoir. On espère que c'est seulement le début d'un partenariat, du dialogue. Ça prendra du temps, mais je pense que rien ne se fait dans la précipitation. On a les B2B cet après-midi. On est à votre disposition pour partager de l'information, pour clarifier certaines choses. Et ce n'est que le début du dialogue et du partenariat. I cannot conclude really without really thanking my colleagues from the bank. Half of them, I'm meeting them for the first time, thanks to COVID. I'm so pleased to be able to, and then also to be able to mobilize 10 people from the bank to travel all the way from Abidjan and Nairobi. They are overwhelmed because they serve the continent. I can really not say thank you enough. So merci à vous tous, and merci to Abdul, our Director for Industrialization. We met a lot of, we actually, Abdul is here because the bank is pushing for a new African continental initiative on pharma, so which also touches on private sector somehow. So merci beaucoup, and over to Faustine. Merci.
Elle mérite beaucoup des acclamations. Hein? Dear Golden Circle members, ADB leadership and team, business community in Rwanda, I think it was worth these 3 hours being in this place to reflect, to absorb, to hear more about the bank and what the bank offers. At least you have an idea that the longest period is between 4 to 6 months, and then the interest rate you have an idea about 4.5 in average. And not only that, you can access the loan in Rwandan francs. You can get the loan for a period up to 15 years with a 5 years grace period. This thing of grace period, is a language that, we always talk about. But ADB is now, bringing a good news or a solution about it. So kindly take it as an opportunity not to miss. Dear colleagues from ADB, I think one of the takeaway that we need to consider is to deepen the understanding of business community in Rwanda in order for you to come up, with the customized products. To have the 10 million is good, but again, that is one of the wider, product range, of what you normally offer. But taking forward, this partnership, I think there is really that need of having some customized, products that are really, responding to the expectations of the business community in Rwanda. Now, dear members, this was just, a starter. But the real talk is starting from around 2. And that is going to be one-to-one, the B2B session. kindly don't miss the B2B session. Even if your project is for 1 million, come to them. I know a solution will be there. So please don't miss. The Private Sector Federation, or PSF, will avail some colleagues to facilitate in case there is a need of translation. So indimi zose rwose turazikoresha, Ikinyarwanda, Igifaransa, Icyongereza, Igiswahili, ariko ikigenderewe cyane nuko habaho icyo kintu cyo kuganira. Rero abakozi b'urugaga baraba bahari kugira ngo babafashe iki muri icyo gikorwa. Now to the bank again, expect more engagement, more calls, be from the business members who are here, and even for those who are not here. We'll be really on regular basis organizing different kind of sessions, be one-to-one, be for small meetings, which can even range from different sectors as well. So that is something that we'll be taking forward. To colleagues from PSF, thank you. I know you have been calling, you have been sending emails and SMSs, so thank you really for that. There is a food, as you have heard, so let me end by wishing you bon appetit. Yet, there is a good lunch waiting for us all. But in addition to lunch, make sure that you leave the KCC today with a promise, from the ADB colleagues. If they don't commit, let us know. We'll make follow-up. So thank you so much and enjoy, the rest of the afternoon.
Mugihe abayobozi bakiri aho, please wait there, then we can join. Yeah. Mushobora to joining kugira ngo dufate group photo. Please, nihagera abagenda tutayifashe. Abantu bashaka kutwima ifoto yabo ni imico mibi, please. Iyo mico ntabwo twayize, ntabwo twayigishijwe, muze dufate ifoto. Please join. Mukomeze inyuma, muhurire hariya kuri stage. Abareba ari imbere bagufi inyuma.
Nyamyuga nakabiwe na rurema